Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm JBrancatella, and this is JBrancatella 2.0 coming through heavy today. We have a special live episode where I'll be reviewing a discussion that I just had yesterday with GodLogic's teacher on the Trinity. This guy named Nick, he has a YouTube channel and TikTok and different social media where he tries to debate Muslims and anyone who really opposes the Trinity on whether or not the Trinity is logical and makes sense. Now, GodLogic has pretty much admitted this publicly, that Nick is his teacher. You can see videos of him asking him questions about the shubuhat of the Muslim meme of responding to 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, not 1. GodLogic clearly has no response to it, and so he's asking his buddy Nick for help. So I'm going to be reviewing that discussion. Honestly, it was so pathetic, so laughable how Nick and these ortho bros still, up until now, after years, they have no response to my objection. And I'm going to show this. I'm going to display this. I've literally been making the same objection for several years now, and none of them have adequate responses. Not Dr. Branson, not Jay Dyer, not Nick, not GodLogic. None of these people have genuine good responses to the objection. Joshua Sajawade, you can throw him in the mix. None of them inspiring philosophy. None of them who claim to hold to this model of the Trinity have any good answer to the objection that I've been making for several years now. Now, it was on Nick's channel or his platform on TikTok. So because of that, when I was burying Nick, he actually removed me from the live stream, started laughing, was up there with his buddies trying to laugh afterwards, but he dodged. He ran. He ran like a track star, just like his buddy GodLogic ran like a track star from the debate and discussion, because I was burying him. He was so ignorant of the basic discussion that we were having. It was kind of hard to actually go through, but I'm going to do my best to try to break things down and make it simple for you guys to understand, inshallah, because my channel is not just about mocking other people or showing how foolish they are. It's also to try to educate my audience, inshallah, especially the Muslims out there. So let me start by sharing my screen. I'm going to share my screen and go over the video with you guys from start to finish, from the moment I started speaking to Nick about the Trinity until the end, until he booted me off. And we're going to go through a lot of things. Inshallah, this is going to be rich and educational for my audience. So, Bismillah, let me share this. Okay, here it is. Let's go. Okay, so I'm here on your live. You said the Trinity is logical.
Yep.
Okay, so but by what relation do you count gods in the Trinity?
By what relation do I count God?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just count by division.
Okay. Okay, so notice the beginning. My first question is, by what relation do you count gods in the Trinity? He asked me, repeats the question. Okay, no problem. I did. And then he said, yeah, we're just going to count by division. So this is the key thing that you guys need to see. From the very beginning, from the first 10 seconds, my first question, until the end of where he tried to switch to Islamic philosophy. And I'm going to show you how foolish this guy is. He doesn't even understand his own theology. I'm going to have to educate him. By his own standard, he would believe in like an infinite number of gods, which is laughable. But from the beginning, what I want people to focus on, and for some reason, it seems hard for people to understand. I don't know why. Intuitively, it's very easy for me to understand, and I'm not the brightest guy. So I don't understand why people, including Nick, have such a difficult time with understanding the distinction between counting things by identity versus counting things by division. I'm going to show from his own scholars that they admit that we count today by identity, and that if you count by that relation of identity, there would be 3 gods. Muslims, don't get too confused. All we mean is the basic simple way in which we count 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. Therefore, the Trinity would have to equal 3 gods. I asked Nick what relation he's counting gods by, because if he's counting that relation of gods by identity, then there would be 3 gods. So he says, oh, it would just be that we're counting gods by division. Now, I'll explain in a lot of detail, inshallah, what that means and how it doesn't actually work. So let's continue. What does that mean?
It means we count whether things are divisible.
I ask him, what does counting by division mean? And he says, it means we count whether things are divisible, right?
You count things that are divisible?
Yeah, whether they're divisible.
Whether they're divisible. Basically, he's saying if they're divisible, then they would count as more than one thing. If they're not divisible, then they wouldn't count as more than one thing.
Or not.
Yeah.
So if they can possibly be divided, then they count as more than one?
If they can be divided, yeah, you can potentially count them as more than one, yeah.
No, but is mere potential for them to be divided, is that sufficient for them to be counted as more than one?
Yeah, I wouldn't see any issue with that.
Okay, there you go. It's sufficient to count them as more than one if they can be divided. So Nick's position of what counting by division is, and I'll show you from the actual academic sources, what the academics who try to represent this view say, right? Which I don't even think Nick is reading. If he is, he's not understanding them. Nick is saying that things count as more than one thing if they possibly can be divided, meaning if they can be separated by time or space. If they cannot be separated by time and space, then they count as one thing. That's what Nick is saying. And then the basic argument is the Holy Trinity, the persons of the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, cannot be separated by time or space. Therefore, they count as one God. That's the basic gist of the argument.
Okay, and is that for anything or that's only for God?
Yeah, that's going to be in relation to God, because other things are going to have things like be universals and particulars in our view. I'm not a nominalist, so.
Yeah, but I'm just saying in terms of God himself, is that true all across the board?
For God, yeah.
Okay, but it's not for created things.
Right.
And why is that?
Because created things are universals and particulars.
So there you go, right? I asked him to be clear, is that going to be universal across the board for God, this counting by division method? And he says, yes. And he sticks to that in the beginning, but we'll see how he waffles back and forth and doesn't understand the distinction between counting by division and counting by identity.
Particulars?
And that's not the case for the Trinity.
No.
Okay, so in the Trinity itself, you said that's going to be true. By what relation do you count persons in the Trinity?
Are you just asking in which way? You're just asking by division again?
By what relation do you count persons?
Yeah, if you're just asking how I count them, again, it's still by division.
It's by division. So how many persons are there in the Trinity?
3 persons.
So there, notice what he said very clearly, folks. He said he's counting divine persons in the Trinity by division. Now watch, we'll see that he's not. And this is the inconsistency in his counting method.
Well, if it's by division, then there would be only one person.
How would there only be one person?
Because you said counting by division means that if they can possibly be divided or separated, then you count them as one in the category that's we're talking about. In the category
we're counting them as we're counting them as one God, but not one person.
And the category of God, you're counting them as one God because they cannot be divided or separated, correct?
Yeah, we're counting them as one God because there's no division, no separation within that. A distinction is.
So did you hear that? We count them as one God because there's no division or separation within them. So because they cannot be divided by time or space, or they're not separable or divisible, they count as one God. That is sufficient for counting them as one rather than more than one. It's not just necessary, it's sufficient, meaning that if two things cannot possibly be separated by time or space, they count as one thing in the category under analysis. So the argument that I'm making, which I've made for several years, with the ortho bros have no answer to, and I'll show that very clearly over the history of this discussion between Branson and Jay Dyer, is that if you count by that same method of division, if things are not possibly separated or divided, they cannot be separated or divided, then that means they count as one God or one thing in that sense. Well, then if the persons themselves cannot be separated or divided from each other, then they would count as one person, which would result in modalism, at least in terms of semantically, which they don't want to admit. So, and we'll see that.
It's going to be different. Distinction doesn't entail separation.
I never said it did I?
Great. So I'm pointing out the fact the persons are distinct, but they're not separated or divided still.
Right. So the persons, which each one of them are God, they count as one God because they cannot be possibly separated by time or space, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, in like manner, because you said that's true for God across the board, in like manner, that would mean that the persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because they cannot be separated by time or space and are not divisible by time or space, they should count as one person, not three persons.
Well, they would count as one God, one ontology, but they're going to be distinct in their personhood specifically via the relation.
Okay, so by what relation are you counting persons? You can't be counting them by division.
We're talking about by the relation of begetting, inspiration.
So you're not counting them by division or separability.
Yes, you can still count them by division and still entail distinctions. You just can't entail division or separation.
And if they're not divided or separated, then that, or cannot possibly be divided or separated, that means they would count as one instead of three.
It would count as one if there's also no distinctions there. But there can be a distinction that's not a separation.
Right. And so in the same way in which in the category of God, there is a distinction but no separation, they would count as three gods.
Well, and if there's multiple gods, yeah, if there's a distinction in godhood, then yeah, but there's no distinction in godhood.
No, because before you just said that they're not separated by time or space. That's what it means to count by division. And I'm saying if that is sufficient for counting them as one thing instead of multiple or more than one, then in like manner, if you applied it consistently across the board, they would have to count as one person instead of three.
Yeah, that would be if and only if there's not a distinction in personhood itself. Again, if there was a distinction in godhood, it would make there multiple gods. But the distinction in personhood makes it okay to say there's multiple persons, even with counting by division.
So notice he's flipping back and forth between counting by identity and counting by division, because he's saying a mere distinction allows you to count them as more than one. But that's my whole point. If the Father's God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit's God, and they are really distinct from each other, right? In the sense that they're not identical, then the normal way in which we would count by identity or distinction or discernibility would mean that they would count as three gods. But he's saying, no. We don't count the gods by identity or discernibility. We count them by division. So if they can't be separated or divided, they count as one God. Well, by that same line of reasoning, if you count persons by division by the same method, then since the persons cannot be divided or separated from each other, they should count as one person. But Trinitarians say there's three persons. That's the inconsistency. You're counting gods by division or separability, and you're counting persons and divine attributes by identity. And it's not just the problem that Nick is counting them, these three different categories, two different ways. That's not the point. The point is that Nick is so low tier, Nick is so low IQ that he doesn't himself understand that he's counting attributes and persons by identity rather than division. He thinks that he's actually counting attributes and persons by division, but he's not. So I have to spend like 20 minutes trying to explain to him that he's not counting persons and attributes by division. He's counting them by identity, but he never gets it. It doesn't clock. At least with Jay Dyer, he recognized this, and I'll show this in a short clip in a few minutes, inshallah.
No, because counting by division means, as you said earlier, that they can only be counted as more than one in the category under examination if they are possibly divided or separated. But the persons are not possibly divided or separated.
Yeah, you can only count them as more than one in that ontology that you're speaking about if
No,
it's going to be a
fact.
separation or division. But you can still count the distinction itself as personhood.
Say the last part again. Count
You
the
can still
persons.
count the distinction in personhood as long as it's just a distinction and it's not a separation or a division.
Yeah, but if it's not a separation or division, then they can't count as more than one.
They can count as more than one, even if there's a distinction. At least there just has to be a distinction in the personhood. If there's a distinction in something underlying, like a subcategory, then no. But if there's a distinction in the primary category, then there can be.
So do you hear that? In order to count the persons as more than one, there only has to be a distinction. That's the whole point. So now you're saying that you're counting the persons by distinction, discernibility, identity, whatever name you'd like to call it, because unlike Nick, I don't care about the terms necessarily, right? We care about the content. We care about the content of what the person is saying. And in his case, he is clearly demonstrating that he's counting the persons by identity, by saying that they are discernible, they're distinct from one another. They have properties that the other doesn't possess, therefore we count them as more than one. He has no idea what he's talking about, honestly.
What do you mean by that distinction between primary and secondary category?
Yeah, if there's a subcategory, right? And let's say for essence, for example, if there's a subcategory of distinction, like between the attributes, for example, well, then that's not going to make for multiple gods. There would have to be a distinction in godhood or an ontology. So in the primary category of personhood, as long as there's a distinction in the primary category itself, like relation, then it's going to be a distinction. If there's a category in the if there's a distinction in the subcategory, like maybe something like the attributes of the personhood, then it's not going to account for a distinction there.
Does anybody know what this guy thinks he's saying? I don't even think he knows what he thinks he's saying. There's a primary category and then a subcategory and a secondary category, and he has no idea what he's even talking about there. He has no idea. Let's listen to that mumbo jumbo again.
Between the right and
distinction between primary and secondary category.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that distinction between primary and secondary category?
Yeah, if there's a
so what is the distinction between primary or secondary category according to Nick? Let's listen.
Subcategory, right? And let's say for essence, for example, if there's a subcategory of distinction, like between the attributes, for example.
So the subcategory of the essence is the attributes, or are the attributes, and the attributes are distinct. That's what he's saying so far.
Well, then that's not going to make for multiple gods. There would have to be a distinction in godhood or an ontology.
That's not a distinction in godhood or ontology. A distinction in attributes, and remember that for later, guys, a distinction in attributes is not a distinction in godhood or ontology, meaning to say that if you have multiple distinct attributes, you don't have multiple gods because the attributes themselves are not gods. They're not in the category of gods. Remember that for later, for when these jokers think they got a gotcha about 99 gods or 99 attributes of Allah.
So in the primary category, as long as there's a distinction in the primary category itself, like relation, then it's going to be a distinction. If there's a category in the if there's a distinction in the subcategory, like maybe something like the attributes of the personhood, then it's not going to account for a distinction there.
Does anybody understand that? Let's listen again.
Then it's going to, as long as there's a distinction in the primary category itself, like relation.
As long there's a distinction in the primary category itself, like relation. So relation is a distinction in primary category.
Then it's going to be a distinction. If there's a category in the if there's a distinction in the subcategory, like maybe something like the attributes of the personhood, then it's not.
The attributes of personhood is a subcategory, which is not going to allow for distinction.
not going to account for distinction there.
That's not going to account for distinction. You see what this fool just said? That the distinctions in personhood, the distinction in the attributes of personhood, is a subcategory that would not allow for distinction. Well, then that would mean that there's only one person, you bozo. No, of course, the fact that they are distinct in terms of their personal attributes means very clearly that they would be distinct and count as more than one person. I mean, this guy, honestly, at this point, he's just talking gibberish and he has no idea what the hell he's saying. Guys, don't be confused. I don't want the Muslim audience to be confused and think, oh, this guy is saying primary, secondary, category, and substance. Guys, I guarantee you, wallahi, God is my witness. This man at this stage has no idea what he's saying. It's not that you guys are stupid and that you don't understand. He himself is talking gibberish and has no idea what he's talking about.
Okay, I don't know if you're really understanding the point that I'm trying to raise or the objection I'm raising. I'm saying to you that if not being divided by time or space is sufficient, it's not just necessary, but is sufficient for counting things as one rather than multiple, then by that same line of counting and by that same method of counting, if the persons cannot possibly be separated by time or space, then they would count as one person. Because
if and only if there's not a distinction in the primary category.
No, but then that means you're counting them by identity.
He said, if and only if there's not a distinction in primary category. Go back to this primary category nonsense. But he's still going back to saying now, if there is a distinction within the entity itself, then that means they would count as more than one, which means that they would count them by identity or discernibility. Likewise, if you count the gods or the persons by discernibility or identity, they would count as three gods, Nick. So to make it simple for my audience, to be consistent, if you count gods, persons, and attributes by identity, discernibility, whatever name you want to give the relation, Leibniz's law, if you count gods, attributes, and persons in the normal way, then on Nick's model, there would have to be three gods, three persons, and multiple attributes, however many attributes he thinks there are. If you count all three categories by division or separability such that they count as one so long as they cannot possibly be divided or separated by time or space, then that would mean they would count as one God, one attribute, and one person. But he's not doing that. Him and the ortho bros are mixing and matching. They're counting gods by division or separability without, and they claim that explicitly so that they get one God, but then they want to get three persons and more than one attribute, so they count them by identity and not by division or separability. You see? And I'm going to demonstrate this. See, Jay Dyer is at least smart enough that he understood this.
No, it just means that we're counting them in the primary category distinction itself.
Yeah, and distinction or counting them by distinction is counting by identity. That's what it means.
You have to prove that counting by distinction can only be counted by identity.
Oh my God,
You know
bro.
that? He said you have to prove that counting by distinction can only be counted by identity. You dummy. How foolish are you? Counting by distinction or discernibility and counting by identity are synonymous. They mean the same thing. It's unbelievable. No, Mr. Omar, you said that he made counting by division and identity the same here again. Yes, he did. He thinks that counting by identity or discernibility is the same as division. Let's listen.
Distinction
In itself.
Yeah, and distinction or counting them by distinction is counting by identity. That's what it means.
You have to prove that counting by distinction can only be counted by identity.
He just said you have to prove that counting by distinction can only be counted by identity. You moron. Counting by distinction is counting by identity. And I'm going to show you that from your own scholars. He has no idea what he's talking about. It's unbelievable, man. I didn't think the guy was this stupid, honestly.
Oh my God, bro. What do you think it means to count by identity?
Yeah, counting by identity, just counting multiple things. For example, if you have, let's see, if you have.
He said counting by identity is just counting multiple things. Oh my God. Counting by identity is just counting multiple things. Well, you can count by division multiple things if they're divided or separated. So when you count by division and you count multiple things, that means because you counted by multiple things, you're also counting by identity? No, dummy. Counting by division is one method. Counting by identity is a different method. Okay? And the only overlap is that separability or divisibility, right, can be a type of distinction. That can be a type of distinction in a sense, right? But it's not, but counting by identity or division, counting by identity or distinction is not limited to the distinctions in division and separability or separated by time and space. Whereas counting by division, the type of distinctions that you can count by are only to be separated by time and space. All other distinctions besides that are insufficient for counting things as more than one. You see the difference? Counting by distinction means that things can be distinct or counted as more than one so long as they are not identical in reality, that there is a real distinction between the two things in question. And that real distinction could be divided by time, space, could be many other things, right? But the property doesn't matter. But in counting division or separability, that's saying that you can only count by type of distinction, which is division or separability. Okay? Some people are saying that I'm lagging or I'm talking about maybe the internet, I don't know. But anyway, let's continue.
Have like a bagel on the table, right? Things, for example,
This is where Nick compares his gut to bagel.
Let's see, if you have like a bagel on the table, right? A good example that David Lasman gives, a bagel on the table and you cut the bagel in half. That would be two bagels now.
So when I'm talking about identity, I'm talking about Leibniz's
Going on. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. How about now, guys? Is it any better? Let's see what's going on here. How about now, guys? Is it any better? Okay, looks like it's better now. Inshallah. Okay. Let's just go back a few seconds because I don't know, maybe the video on even the actual video playing was lagging too. Let's see.
Yeah, counting by identity, just counting multiple things. For example, if you have, let's see, if you have like a bagel on the table, right? Like a good example that David Lasman gives, if you have a bagel on the table and you cut the bagel in half, according to identity, that would be two bagels now.
Do you hear what this fool just said? If you have a bagel on the table and you cut the bagel in half, then that means now there are two bagels on the table. No, there's not. there's a half of bagel and another half of a bagel. You idiot. There's not two bagels on a table. There's a half of a bagel and another half of a bagel. Why? Because a full bagel is defined as the entire bagel. In order to have one bagel, you have to have the entire bagel, top and bottom. You know how a lot of times you cut a bagel in half, like slice it down the middle, so you have one half and the other half, and they can go together? If I were to take a bagel and cut a bagel in half, and I give one half of the bagel to somebody, and then I ask, how many bagels did you eat today? Later on, somebody says, how many bagels did you eat today? Are they going to say that I ate one full bagel, or are they going to say that they ate half of a bagel? They're going to say that they ate half of a bagel because that's what they ate. They didn't eat a full bagel. So it's not about them being separated. It's the fact of how you define things. If a bagel is defined as a full bagel is defined as the entire thing, top and bottom together, right? Or even not together. If you split them apart, but then you eat the entire thing, then we would say that you ate a full bagel. But if you split them up and you only eat half of the bagel, we would say that you ate half of a bagel. You didn't eat a full bagel. My God, this guy is honestly brain dead.
Oh man. So when I'm talking about,
at that point, I'm kind of laughing and I'm struggling to see, how can I get through to this guy? How can I actually get through to him? I don't think I can because he's not too bright.
Identity, I'm talking about. Oh man. So when I'm talking about identity, I'm talking about Leibniz's law. That's what I'm talking about in this context. I'm talking about counting by discernibility. If you count things as more than one, so long as they're not identical to each other, i.e., they're discernible from one another.
So what kind of identity there?
Meaning that not everything that's true of one is true of the other, or they don't share all of the same properties.
So absolute identity, right?
Yeah.
So why can you only count that then by identity? And then if there's a distinction, you can't count it by division. What's the symmetry breaker?
You hear that? What is the symmetry breaker? Meaning, what's the distinction supposed to be between counting by identity and counting by division? He doesn't understand. He genuinely doesn't understand.
True of one is true of the other, or they don't share all of the same properties.
So absolute identity, right?
Yeah.
So why can you only count that then by identity? And then if there's a distinction, you can't count it by division. What's the symmetry breaker?
He says if there's a distinction, you can't count it by division. You can only count by division if the type of distinction is one that's related to space and time or being divided by space and time. Otherwise, if it's not a distinction of being divisible or separable by space or time, then it's counting by identity or discernibility and not division. That's the difference. How do you not get this?
No, I don't.
That's my question. What's the symmetry breaker?
I don't think you're understanding the point.
Honestly, I laugh and giggle throughout because I don't know how to make this any clearer to this guy. I really don't.
Because you just said before that you don't see a difference, or you're saying that there is a difference between counting by discernibility or identity. No, they're the same thing in this case.
Yeah, I'm just asking you what's a symmetry breaker because you said you can't then count by
symmetry breaker
division.
For what?
You said that you would have to count by identity. If there's a distinction, you can't count by division then. So I said I want you
no.
The symmetry breaker. So you admit we can't count by division if there's a distinction?
No, that's not what I said.
Can we count by division if there's a distinction?
If you count by division, then that would entail that there's only one person in the Trinity.
How does that entail that if there's a primary distinction?
Okay. So let's go back to the beginning when you defined what counting by division is. You want to define it again?
I want you to tell me why, if there's a primary distinction, that it would not entail there's multiple persons, even with counting by division.
If there's a primary distinction, let's listen to that again.
it would not.
Again?
I want you to tell me why, if there's a primary distinction, that it would not entail there's multiple persons.
If there's a primary distinction, why wouldn't that entail that there's multiple persons? I believe that if there's a real distinction, that would count as multiple persons. But because you believe that the persons cannot be separated or divided by time or space, then that type of distinction is not one regarding division or separability. Okay? It just means that they have different properties, in which case you are counting them by identity or discernibility, not by separability or division. I don't know how to get any clearer. I really don't. Maybe it's a failing on my part that I cannot explain this in a simpler manner to a guy who doesn't understand the difference between a full bagel and a half a bagel.
Even with counting by division.
Because counting by division means that if they are not possibly separated by time or space, then that is sufficient in itself to count them as one rather than more than one.
Yeah, that is able to count them as one in one way. So we do count them as one in one way in their ontology, but it does not mean you cannot count them as more than one in another way. It does, for example, if you count a bagel by division, again, as David Leisman writes in his paper, that does not mean then that you cannot attribute different distinctions and count more than one in any way in the bagel. I can say there's one bagel, right? And this is not an analogy for the Trinity, just so y'all know. This is talking about counting by division. But then you have multiple raisins. You can still count multiple raisins in the bagel, for instance. So this is just showing that even counting by division, you can still count distinctions within things.
So there you go. The raisins in the bagel, are the raisins in the bagel separated by space? Yeah, because one raisin is over here and another raisin is over here. So the raisins are separated by space. Therefore, in that case, you're still counting those raisins by division, according to you. So the guy just doesn't understand what he's even saying. He has no idea at all. And he's comparing God, or this idea of counting by division, to the bagel and the raisins. There are multiple raisins in the bagel. Why? Not only because they're separated by space, but because they have different properties, right? One is one size, one is another. Not only that, one has certain properties and may be a very specific color that the other one is not the exact same color if you really analyze it. Okay? They do not have the same exact properties. Every single property of one raisin is not identical to every single property of the next raisin. Therefore, they're not only distinct in space, or can be separated by space, but they also have distinct properties amongst them. Oh boy.
Yeah, but when you count by distinction within things, then you're counting by a different relation. You're counting by discernibility in that case.
Yeah, I still think, though, that fits just fine in line with counting by division, that you can still count distinctions within division. If you're saying
he says you can still count distinctions within division. Yes, but when you're doing that and you're counting those distinctions not by anything related to space or time, then you're counting by identity, dummy.
We can't,
but you're just
count
counting
distinctions by
ways.
division. If you're saying we can't then count by distinction within division, then you're going to have to provide me the symmetry breaker as to why we can't.
No, I don't think you're understanding the point. I didn't say that there's a contradiction in the two methods of counting. I said that they're just two different ways of counting. That's the point.
Yeah,
when you count,
So my point is, can we count these things by division?
When you're counting.
Yeah. So this is the point, guys. The objection at this point is not, oh, Nick is counting one thing by division and another by identity, and that's contradictory. That's not the point at this point. The point is trying to convince Nick that he's counting persons and attributes by identity. But he's claiming that he's counting persons and attributes by division. I'm trying to convince him and explain to him his own model that he's not counting persons and attributes by division. He's counting them by identity. He doesn't understand this. Jay Dyer, I'll give it to you, Jay. You're smart enough to know that you are counting persons, and attributes by identity and not division. So this is a disagreement between Nick and Jay and Branson, which I'll show. So Nick, you didn't take enough notes from Branson's works or videos or that of Jay. This is a disagreement within the ortho bros. They cannot agree on whether or not they're counting persons and attributes by identity, as Branson and Jay Dyer would now freely admit. But Nick is claiming that, no, we're counting them by division.
Counting by discernibility or identity, that's one thing. When you count by division, that's another thing. They're not the same counting method.
Yeah, the point is, though, is I'm saying you can still count multiple indivisible things by division and still get to multiple persons. That's the point.
Okay, did you hear that, guys? Listen to that. Let's really break this one sentence down of how dumb this guy is. How absolutely stupid and boneheaded this guy is. Listen to this sentence again very carefully. We should have this transcribed, actually. This is why I need my boy speaking Muslim. If you're watching live right now, brother, I need you because you are the transcript king. You are the transcript king. And Muslim man, too, you're just lagging slightly behind now in second place, but you're coming up, bro. I respect you. Let's see if we can actually get this. Let's get some closed captioning. Okay?
Division, that's another thing. They're not the same counting method.
Yeah, the point is, though, is I'm saying you can still.
The point is, listen to the big point. I'm saying you can do what? I'm saying you can do what? Let's listen.
Still count multiple indivisible.
You can still count multiple undivisible. It's better to say indivisible, Nick, but what's all right. Indivisible
Things by division and
things by division
still get to multiple persons.
and still get to multiple persons. Did you hear that? Let's listen.
The indivisible thing. Point is, though, is I'm saying you can still count multiple indivisible things by division and
You can count multiple indivisible things by division and still get multiple things. How? If counting by division means that you only count things as more than one if they can possibly be divided, then how can you count multiple things that are indivisible from one another by division and get more than one? Because counting by division means that if they're indivisible, they count as one thing. So if they're not divisible, how can you count them by division and say they're more than one? The guy is brain dead. He's absolutely brain dead.
still get to
Counting method.
Yeah, the point is, though, is I'm saying you can still count multiple indivisible things by division and still get to multiple persons.
Explain that. Explain that. How do you count multiple indivisible things by division and get more than one and get multiple persons? How do you count indivisible persons by division and get more than one person? If their persons cannot be divided, how do you count them as more than one by division if counting by division means you only count them as more than one if they're divided? But if they cannot be divided, you can't count them as more than one. My God, man. I feel like at this point, I don't know, maybe I'm talking myself out here. I'm sitting here thinking, Jay, are you the only one that understands what's going on here? I don't know, because this guy, I'm trying to explain it to him for 10, 15 minutes. He has no idea. He legitimately has no idea what's happening at this point.
That's the point. There's no issue.
Okay, repeat that one more time. Go ahead.
You can still count multiple indivisible things by division, get distinctions, and count multiple persons. As
Oh boy. Oh, Ya Rabbi Rahman. Ya Rabbi Rahman, help us. Help us.
long as it's not divisible within reality or separated within reality.
Let's listen to that again.
By division,
One more time. Go ahead.
you can still count multiple indivisible things by division.
You can still count multiple indivisible things by division. Okay. Tell me how.
get distinctions and count
Get distinctions
multiple persons.
and count multiple persons. Yes, but those distinctions then are not distinctions of division or separability. There are other distinctions, and if those other distinctions are sufficient for counting them as more than one, then that means you're not counting by division, because counting by division says you can only count them as more than one if they can be divided.
As long as it's not divisible within reality or separated within reality.
If it's not divisible or separated, notice he's defining it, guys, not me. If it's not divisible or separated within reality, how would they count as more than one? If counting them by division means you count them as more than one if and only if they can be separated or divisible within reality. If they can't, then they can't count as more than one, at least not by division. If you count them as more than one, you would be counting them by a different relation. The common relation is by identity. They're discernible. They're not identical to each other, even if they're not separated or divisible. Man, I feel like I don't know, man. I don't know. Somebody help me out there. Am I talking to myself? I don't know. Although the construction guys are outside, maybe they could hear me.
Okay, so then it's not true that counting by division means that if two things are indivisible and inseparable from one another, then they necessarily are going to count as one in every sense.
Not in every sense. No, it doesn't mean they're going to count.
There, did you hear that? So I'm saying at this point, maybe Nick is going back on his definition of counting by division, and he doesn't know what it means, because at this point he's contradicting himself. So I say, if things cannot be separated or by time or space in any way, then they count as one in every sense. And he says no. So that means his understanding of counting by division is something different than what he agreed to in the beginning.
One in every sense. No, where'd you get that from?
Because if they're indivisible and inseparable from one another in every sense, then that would mean that they would count as one in every sense.
Yeah, I know. I don't think that them being indivisible doesn't mean there's distinction. No distinctions entailed. There can be distinctions that aren't divisible distinctions.
I agree. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Nicholas. He said, I believe there can be distinctions that are not division or separability. Let's listen again.
Doesn't mean there's distinction. No distinctions entailed. There can be distinctions that aren't divisible distinctions.
There can be distinctions that are not divisible distinctions. I agree 100%. But if you are counting by those distinctions and those are not divisible distinctions, then you're not counting by identity. You're not counting by division. You're counting by identity in that case. Man, this guy is slow.
Oh, man. I know that there can be a distinction without...
Notice, it's not just a cope that I'm doing this now. The exact same reaction that I'm having now is what I was having and saying live in the debate or discussion. It's not as if I'm saying anything new.
Separation or division. I believe that too. That's not the point. That means that when you're counting them in that case as more than one thing, even though they cannot possibly be separated or divided, but they are distinct, meaning that they're not identical, then in that case, when you count them as more than one, you are counting by identity, not by division.
Yeah, again, my whole point is, though, is that when we're talking about counting by division itself, we can still conclude that there are distinctions that we can count within that division itself, and the two things itself won't be divisible, like attributes, for instance, or like, let's say, for instance, the person.
Attributes are divine persons.
What?
The attributes or divine persons.
Yeah, so we can say that the persons and their attributes, the relations to one another, is what distinguishes them. That's going to be a primary distinction that we can still count within counting by division.
He still thinks that if you count the person, the indivisible and inseparable persons and attributes as more than one, you're counting them by division. Even though to count things as more than one by division means they have to be possibly separated by or divisible. The guy has no idea, man.
But when you count them as more than one person and you count them as more than one attribute, by what relation are you?
Okay, dude, let me help you guys in the chat. A lot of you do not understand this, Muslim, Christian, or otherwise. Okay. So, Jamie, you just said Jake is making the point that Nick is counting by two methods, identity and division. Yes, but it's not only that. It's not only that. The point I'm making now is that Nick is counting by identity and division, but he's claiming that he's only counting by division. That's the key part, which Jamie didn't include. It's not just that Nick is counting by identity and division. It's that he's claiming that he's only counting by division. And he's an idiot and doesn't realize that when he claims he's counting the attributes and persons by division, he's not. He's counting them by identity. I don't know why people are leaving this out. I can't understand it. Oh boy. Unbelievable.
Person. But when you count them as more than one person and you count them as more than one attribute, by what relation are you counting them as more than one?
Yet we're still counting them within counting by division.
So again, he keeps saying he's counting the attributes and persons by division, even though they're not divisible. And to count by division means you count them as more than one, if and only if they are divisible. You see the contradiction? Do you see the contradiction? Nick himself has no idea what counting by division means. The guy is a buffoon.
How? How are you counting them?
Because of the primary distinction.
Because of the primary distinction. What does that mean?
Bro, I already explained to you what primary distinction is. Dude, primary distinction is going to be within the subject itself, within the subject at hand.
A primary distinction is a distinction within the subject. Yeah. And is that distinction related to separability? If yes, then you could say that you're counting by division or separability. If not, then it's not counting by division or separability.
Yeah.
So not going to be in a subcategory of that. So not going to be like within an attribute, but going to be within the actual thing itself.
Where is the attribute if it's not in the thing itself?
No, I'm saying the attribute, there's different, there's primary and secondary one.
Can I say this? Am I allowed to say this? I'll let Turkish Skeptic say it. Since he said it, what a dumbass. I'm going to agree with that. Nick, you are a dumbass, a professional dumbass. I will say that. God help me. I will say that Nick is a professional dumbass. And if you say, brother Jake, you shouldn't use that language, I'm sorry. Astaghfirullah. Blame it on Turkish Skeptic. I just made taqleed of him. Blame it on him. It's 100% his fault. I'm sorry, guys. Forgive me.
So for example, if we're talking about the essence or we're talking about some sort of essential property, that's going to be primary. If we're talking about something external to the thing, that's going to be secondary.
Yeah, but in the case of the persons, we're not talking about something external. We're talking about something within them.
Which is why it's primary.
Exactly.
So the primary distinction is what distinguishes them as multiple persons.
Right. And that distinction, because you're counting them as distinction, you are counting them by identity, by the fact that they are distinct from one another.
You're not counting distinct things as necessarily counting by identity. You have to justify that.
Yes. Okay. So let me read
that again.
Not counting distinct identity by the fact that they are distinct from one another.
You're not counting distinct things as necessarily counting by identity. You have to justify that.
He thinks that counting things by a relation other than being them divided by or separated is not counting by identity. It is. It's counting by distinction, discernibility, identity, Leibniz's law, whatever you want to call it. But it's not counting them by division, because if it were counting them by division and they're not divisible, then you couldn't get more than one.
Yes. Okay. So let me read for you from Bo Branson, who explicitly explains this. Okay. 1 second here. All right. So Branson says, and this is a quote, "Today we count Fs by one."
Hold on a second. Let me address this in the chat because I don't know. Maybe some people are genuinely, some Muslims are genuinely confused about what we're talking about here. You say, Jake, when it comes to Aqidah, isn't this an issue for scholars to discuss? Is it permissible to debate non-Muslims about Islamic Aqidah? This wasn't about Islamic Aqidah. If you see, okay, Christianity and the Trinity are logical. Prove me wrong. I went up there and used the Muslim meme, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. How is that a scholarly discussion in Islamic Aqidah? I don't know what you've been watching, IA, for the past 56 minutes, but you clearly haven't been watching or understanding too much. Okay?
All right.
Well, now I finally read a definition for Nick from an Eastern Orthodox scholar, Bo Branson, who I've debated several times, in hopes that this might get through to him. Because I'm thinking, man, it might be just this crazy, muzzy Jake, you know. Just Nick, it just won't register in his brain because he sees Jake saying something. So maybe go to Bo Branson to help him out, but it doesn't really work.
Second here. All right. So Branson says, and this is a quote, "Today we count Fs by one, logical subjects that are two, discernible, keyword, discernible from, or at least not identical to." That's what it means. Discernible and not identical to is the same in this context. "With one another and are both F." That is, if X and Y differ in any way and are both F-ish, we count them as two Fs. So in this context, when we say counting by identity or counting by discernibility, they're synonymous with each other. It means the same thing. Branson is explaining.
Where did he say, though, that that is the only way to count distinctions? You said that that's the only way to count distinctions. I want to know where you got that from.
Did I say that's the only way to count distinctions? No, I said division and division and separability are types of distinctions, but counting by division limits and says you can only count things as more than one if they are separable or divisible. Counting by identity says no, you can count things as more than one even if they're indivisible and inseparable, so long as they're not identical. So identity includes and allows for counting things as more than one if they're divisible or separable, because that's a type of real distinction or a type of non-identity or a distinction or discernibility. However, counting by identity is not limited to that. It allows for other distinctions and discernible facts that are not limited to notions of time, space, divisibility, inseparability, etc., etc.
What do you mean that's the only way to count distinctions?
If you count multiple distinct things, the only way to do that is by identity. I'm saying, where are you getting that from?
So now he's making the claim that I'm saying you can only count things by identity. I said, no, for the sake of argument, you can count by what you're saying, division or separability. I'm making the claim that you, dummy, are counting attributes and persons by identity, not division, but you're claiming that you're counting them by division. You see the difference?
No, I'm saying it's assumed by the fact that they're not identical. That's the relation you're counting to that.
So is that the only way to count distinct things by identity?
No, you can count distinct things by other relations so long as you provide a criteria for that. But your criteria for counting by division is not fulfilled in the case of persons or attributes, because they can only be counted as multiple persons or multiple attributes if and only if they are possibly separated or divided from one another, which they're not. Therefore, that's not fulfilled, so you cannot count them as more than one person or attribute in the case of counting by division.
No, we wouldn't be able to count them as multiple ontologies, because when we say that they're not separated or not divisible, then we're talking about ontology there. But when we then speak about the fact that they are distinct within relation, is going to be talking about the fact that they're distinct in personhood. So we can entail a distinction in personhood, but what we can't do in counting by division here is talking about a distinction within ontology.
Are the persons distinct in ontology?
So notice he said, we're not talking about distinctions in ontology here. And this is where we get to the ontology part. Listen to this.
No, what?
Are the persons distinct in ontology?
No, what?
Are the persons distinct in ontology? He says, no. What? No, it's obvious. The persons are not distinct in ontology, sir. Guy has no idea what ontology even is.
That's my point.
So the persons are not ontologically distinct.
No.
Okay, in what way are they distinct?
Relationally?
Okay, and is the relation ontological?
No, it's not an ontological.
So the persons are not ontologically distinct, according to Mr. Nick. And he says that the relations of opposition, or the relations that make them distinct, are not ontological. That's what he says. That's what he's literally saying.
Okay, and is the relation ontological?
No, it's not an ontological relation. If you
What
mean
is
that,
it?
if you mean it's a difference in ontology. It's a
Is it
personal relation.
constitutive of the persons?
What do you mean by that?
Are relations things that exist in between entities, or are they something that are possessed by the entities?
Do you mean by in between? Do you mean that separating them ontologically? I don't know what you mean by in between entities.
Okay, do you know what a relation is?
Yes.
What is a relation? What is a relation in your view?
Yes, a relation is going to be some sort of connection between two or more things.
Okay, do the persons possess those relational properties?
Yes.
Are they ontological?
They're not a different ontology. You can say that they are identical to the ontology of the essence.
No,
they're not a different ontology.
Are relational properties ontological? Are they real?
Yeah, they're of the ontology, yeah.
Okay, so then that goes back to
You
the
see how
point
he
when you just
switched?
said they're
Still one
not.
ontology.
You see how he switched? Before, he said the persons are not ontologically distinct. What makes the persons distinct? Their hypostatic properties. Are their hypostatic properties ontological? He says yes. Well, if the hypostatic properties are ontological and that's what makes them distinct, then they have to be ontologically distinct. You bozo. The guy doesn't even know what ontology means. I don't think he has any background in metaphysics, epistemology, any broad sense of philosophy. He has no formal education regarding this. He probably watched a few Jay Dyer videos. Shout out to Jay. I know you're much smarter than him, Jay. I give you a lot of credit for that. But he just watched a couple Jay Dyer videos and completely misrepresented the whole discussion. He has no idea what ontology even is. He has no idea. So I'll show you what it means, guys, in just a few minutes. But let's listen to that part again.
Okay. Do the persons possess those relational properties?
Yes.
Are they ontological?
They're not a different ontology. You can say that they are identical to the ontology of the essence.
No.
They're not a different ontology.
Are relational properties ontological? Are they real?
Yeah, they're of the ontology, yeah.
So relational properties are ontological, according to Nick. The relational properties that the persons possess is what distinguishes the persons from each other, but yet the persons are not ontologically distinct. Does that make any sense? If what distinguishes the persons from each other are their hypostatic personal properties, which are ontological, then that would entail that they're ontologically distinct. You bozo. I mean, the guy is just, he has no idea. Let me show you guys this. I mean, this is just a very basic thing here that I'm going to show you. For people who want to look at this, okay? Let me show you guys this. Let me just give you a very, very simple definition of ontology. This is by Barry Smith, the philosopher. He's not a Muslim, okay? In his chapter 11 on ontology, he says this: philosophical ontology. Ontology as a branch of philosophy is the science of what is, of the kinds and structures of objects, properties, events, processes, and relations in every area of reality. Ontology is often used by philosophers as a synonym for metaphysics. A label, meaning literally what comes after the physics, is a term used by early students of Aristotle to refer to what Aristotle himself called first philosophy. Okay? So ontology and metaphysics, roughly speaking, are the same thing. Ontology in philosophy is just a study of what is, or what is real, or what exists, or in modal ontological discussions about the possibility of what is, what could be, or what could possibly exist. Do you understand? So ontological, all ontological means is, in this conversation, is real. That's all it means. Real, something that exists, something that has real existence. The guy doesn't even know what ontology means or what ontological means. And that's going to play into the second part of the discussion where he derails everything.
Okay, so then that goes back to the point when you just said
So it's still one ontology.
They're not ontologically different. They are, because the persons each possess.
I just said the same ontology, dude.
You just said that the persons are not ontologically distinct. You know what that would mean? That would mean modalism, Nick. By the common way in which the term ontology or ontologically is used, all it means is that they're really distinct, that there's a real distinction between them, that they have or possess properties that are real that one has that the other doesn't have. That's what it means to be ontologically distinct in this case, Nick. But you don't know that because you don't even know what the word ontology means. You don't know what counting by division is. You don't know what counting by identity is. You don't know what ontology means. And you're dealing with the Muslim metaphysician, in case you didn't know. So I know these things. I actually have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. I primarily studied Western analytic philosophy. And I also have a master's degree in philosophy, theology, and religions. And I'm going to show you when we get into the second part of the discussion that I just didn't study this formally as well. I actually have books from professors from my program who were my own teachers, like Richard Cross, who wrote many books, several books and articles on the theology of John Duns Scotus. So he was actually my professor, Nick. I actually know about formal distinctions, which I'll explain in just a few seconds, because I was making videos on these topics before Nick was even on YouTube, which I'll show that too, inshallah. Let's continue.
Dude.
Okay, so what personal property does the father have that the son doesn't have, and vice versa?
The fact that he begets the son.
Okay, and what does the son possess that the father doesn't?
The fact of being begotten.
Okay, and are those real properties that each one possesses that the other doesn't?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so is a property ontological?
It can subsist in ontology. It itself is not ontological.
A property is not ontological, according to Nick. A property is not ontological, according to Nick. So, Nick, are you a nominalist with respect to properties? That you believe that properties are not real? Is that what you mean? Or are you just a dummy and you don't know what ontological means in this sense, that all it means is that it's real and that it has existence? Oh, man. Woo, this boy's getting worked over, huh?
A property is not ontological.
No, properties aren't just necessarily ontological.
So then when I repeated it, he got nervous. So he kind of slid back and said, no, properties are not necessarily ontological.
Wait,
What
you
are
think,
they?
wait, you think,
Wait. Is the property of the Son being begotten, is that hypostatic property real? Is it ontological? Does it have existence? Yes, therefore it's ontological, my friend. Same thing with the Father begetting the Son, the act of begetting or spirating the Spirit. Those are properties which are real, which exist, which are ontological. That's what ontological means, dummy. You don't even know what ontological means. So then he skips over, and now he tries to spend the last 10 to 15 minutes questioning me about Islam.
think properties are all ontological?
Do I think properties are all ontological? Listen.
What are they?
So do you think that Allah has 99 different ontologies?
Do you think that Allah has 99 different ontologies? Wow, I'm going to get to that. But before we switch into the Islamic part of the discussion, I want to show you guys this, because it's not just Jake. I don't want to show you that this is just brother Jake. I want to show you that Jay Dyer, shout out to Jay. You know, man, you are a complete genius compared to Nick. I'll give it to you, brother. Jay Dyer makes Nick look like an intellectual midget. Someone that if he went to the intellectual theme park, he would not be able to get on a ride. That's how Jay makes him look. He makes him look like an intellectual midget, that he came up short like a midget at Six Flags. Six Flags is a theme park in the US. So compared to Jay Dyer, Nick is an intellectual midget. I'm telling you this, I'm being honest. Listen to my conversation with Jay where I used the same argument almost 2 years ago, but Jay was smart enough to, kind of follow the argument through. And people say, oh, Jake, you completely edited this clip, which has almost 100,000 views on YouTube, where it says Jay Dyer believes in 3 little g gods, because that's basically what he admits to. But watch this. It's the same line of questioning that I'm giving to Nick in the first 20 minutes that he's too slow to understand. But Jay grasps it.
How many persons are there in the Trinity?
3.
Are they separated by time or space?
No.
So you count the persons by identity and not division, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, do you hear that? That's a key difference between Jay and Nick. What do I ask him? I ask him, how many persons are there in the Trinity? Jay says 3. Are the persons separated by time or space? No. Okay, so if they're not separated by time and space, that means you count them by identity and not division. Why? Because if you were counting them by division or separability, you would have to count them as one person, because they only count as more than one entity or thing in the category under analysis of counting if they are possibly separated or divisible. But since they're not, that means if you count them as more than one, you're not counting them by division or separability, you're counting them by identity. Now, Jay clocked that and he admitted it. He said, yes, I am counting the persons in the Trinity by identity. Now, Nick is doing the same thing. He's counting the persons in the Trinity by identity, but he keeps claiming that he's counting them by division because he doesn't know the difference between counting by division and counting by identity. Jay understands the difference and admits that he counts the persons by identity. That's the key difference already. Jay, you are brilliant compared to Mr. Nick. I got to give it to you, Jay. I got to give it to you.
How many persons are there in the Trinity?
3.
Are they separated by time or space?
No.
So you count the persons by identity and not division, right?
Correct.
Okay. Does God have one eternal attribute or energy, or more than one?
More than one.
Are his eternal attributes separated from each other by time or space?
No.
Okay. So you count the attributes by identity and not division, right?
Correct.
There you go. The second example, I say to Jay, how many eternal attributes or energies does God have? Does he have one or more than one? Jay says more than one. God has multiple or more than one eternal attributes. Then I'd say, okay, are the attributes of God, according to you, that are eternal, are they separated by time or space? He says no. So what's the conclusion of that? Therefore, you are counting the attributes by identity and not division, right, Jay? He says, correct. So again, Jay, you're 2 for 2. You're really sharp, buddy. And I mean that. Jay is much sharper than this guy. But with Nick, I tried to do the same thing. And he said, no, even though the attributes we count and persons, we count them as more than one, and even though they're not separated by time or space and not possibly divisible or separable, we are still counting them by division or separability. Jay has enough sense to understand the distinction of counting by identity and counting by division or separability. That's why when I bring him down this line of reasoning, he admits that he counts the persons and attributes by identity, not by division. Now watch what's the fallout of that, which I never got to get to with Nick because I couldn't even get past the first baby step with this guy.
Okay, so if we count gods in the Trinity by the same method of identity, how many gods would we count?
Depends on what God picks out.
If we're talking about the persons.
3.
So there would be 3 gods if we counted by identity, and the same method that we count the attributes or eternal energies and the persons, correct?
Right. Little g God, as you know.
Okay, so there would be 3 little g gods. Thank you. How many persons are there in the Trinity?
3.
Well, that's where the argument leads, right? Because if you're counting attributes and persons in the Trinity by identity, then if the Father's God, the Son is God, and the Holy Spirit's God, and they're distinct, they're discernible, then if we were counting gods by identity, they would count as 3 gods. Jay recognized that and admitted that. He said, yeah, they would count as 3 little g gods. So if they counted consistently across the board, the same way that they count not just things in creation, count attributes in the Trinity, count persons in the Trinity, and counting gods in the Trinity, if they counted the same way by identity, all 3, which they already do 2 out of 3, then there would be 3 gods. Likewise, on the flip side, if they counted all 3 categories by division or separability, that would mean that there's 1 God in the Trinity, 1 person, and 1 attribute, which they don't do. So they have an inconsistent counting method. And it's not just that they count some things by division and some by identity, and that's the argument against it. No, it's that they don't have a principled counting method. They don't have a standard, a principle standard by which they say these things we count by identity, these things we count by division, and then them show you that both within God and within creation. They don't have that. Whereas Jake, I count everything by identity. And therefore, I'm able to say there's 3 gods, 3 persons, and multiple attributes in the Trinity. And I'm completely consistent. They don't have a principled counting method. They don't. But I couldn't even get to that with Nick because he was too dumb to even recognize the difference between counting by division and counting by identity. Jay at least knew it and understood it. Okay? So shout out to Jay. Much love to you, bro. Much love and respect to Jay. Now, we'll show it's not only Jay, but also Jay's teacher. Jay's teacher also understands this, okay? So after my debate with Jay, he did a review with Dr. Bo Branson, who has a PhD in the LPT. The name of his PhD, his paper, which is over 300 pages, of which I actually read, which Nick hasn't read, and Jay probably even hasn't read most of it. Okay, it's literally called The Logical Problem of the Trinity. So Bo Branson, who has a PhD in the subject and is the one who advocates for counting by division, I think that he would know a little bit more about it than someone like Nick. Wouldn't you agree? So let's see what he and Jay Dyer say in their review after I had the debate with Jay. Let's take a look.
To me, my understanding was that to help make this kind of clear was it's just sort of like different things are going to be counted in different ways by the nature of what they are, right? So if you have an abstract object, it's going to be different than a mundane object. So it's going to be counted differently.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much right. I mean, yeah, you could put in those terms like maybe abstract versus concrete. So different people in the history, like in the tradition, kind of formulated in different ways, but it's recognizably like the same thing that they're getting at. So like Aristotle talks about quantity in the.
So notice how I said that the problem with Jay, Branson, and even Nick, once he realizes that he's actually counting gods by division and counting persons and attributes by identity, once he's smart enough to get to that point, as Jay and Branson are, they need to come up with a principled counting method for why he counts some things by identity and some by division, right? And the principle by which Jay attempts to give a proper distinction is that we count abstract things by identity because they're not spatial, and we count concrete things by division. But the problem with that is, guess what? The persons of the Trinity are concrete. Gods in the Trinity, which are persons, are concrete. So by that same standard, what would that mean? That would mean that if you're counting concrete entities by division, and if they're not divisible, then they count as one, then that would mean that there's one God in the Trinity, but there's also only one person. So by any standard, guys, I've already done this. I've already done a review of their review 2 years ago, okay? By any principled standard that they try to come up with, I show how they're inconsistent with their own standard. If you try to use the abstract concrete distinction, then gods in the Trinity are concrete, and they're also persons are also concrete. So that would mean if you counted both of them, as he said, we count abstract things by identity and concrete things by division, that would mean there would be one God and one person in the Trinity, which is modalism. There's only one person, essentially, at least linguistically or semantically, which they don't want to admit, which I'm going to show that Branson basically concedes to this and concedes to this objection. Now, let's go further here. I've got another timestamp that I want to look at. Okay. Where Branson expands on this abstract concrete business. Take a listen.
Today, but you have to have a way to be able to count things that aren't physical objects. And so when you're doing that, then you just count by identity, because if you're talking about abstract objects, or you got there's certain things where how else would you count them? So those people will say, yeah, you count those by identity, but you can't really you just can't do that with physical objects, because physical objects can overlap.
So there you go, guys. Now, Branson in this section, notice the distinctions. See, these guys are following my argument enough. You notice how it says Muslim claims against the Christians? That's not Brother Omar, the Muslim in the chat. That's not Brother Muslim speaking Muslim. And I'm not saying this to, inshallah, to big up myself. But you see where it says Muslim? That's referring to Jake. Okay? I'm the one who actually brought this research out in the open. Okay? The people who are discussing this, they're getting it from me. Christians and Muslims. That's the honest reality. It's just a fact of the matter. Okay? They're taken from my playbook. My playbook. Muslim claims, all of the different shifts in the discussion has been through my argumentation. My argumentation. So this, what they have on the screen there, those are my arguments. Okay? Now, Branson, in that part of the clip, this guy said, is Libiano taking from you too, bro? What do you think? What do you think? Just look. This is, again, not, inshallah, not to big up myself, but look at when Jake Brancatella came on, for better or worse, a lot of people would say for worse, came on the debating scene. This was about 6-7 years ago, about 6 years ago. Prior to that, no Muslim ever used the words logical problem of the Trinity. Show me. Publicly use this, okay, prior to 6 years ago. Show me a single one. Show me Christians who were even using this terminology before that, other than a couple odd interviews where Branson may have been being interviewed. So look, this is what I'm trying to tell you guys. If you ask, is Libiano taking from me? Go ask him. I don't need to tell you. Go ask him yourself. Where did he learn about this stuff, about the LPT and the details about it and these kind of things? Did he learn it? Would he have learned this, or would people be talking about it on the level that they are if Jake had not popularized this? Now, I'm not saying these people are not doing their own research and their own reading and things of that nature. I'm not taking anything away from them, but I'm just stating a fact that prior to me, it wasn't being discussed this way. And that's a fact. And Muslims and Christians would have to admit this. I have popularized this literature. I didn't make this up on my own. I just read the text and then I bring it out, the information. So this is what it is. Okay. Now, in this section here, Branson, prior to that, Jay made a distinction and trying to make a principled counting method of distinguishing when we count things by identity versus by division. Okay. We count abstract things by identity and we count concrete things by division. But the problem with that is what I just showed. If you count concrete things by division or separability, that would mean that there's one person and one God in the Trinity. Then it wouldn't be really a Trinity, would it? Secondly, on the flip side, then we just heard here from Branson where he was making the distinction not between abstract and concrete, but between physical and non-physical, which is sometimes, depending in the literature, synonymous with concrete versus abstract. Abstract are seen as non-spatial entities, where concrete things are seen usually as physical entities. But people argue that there could be things that are concrete in the sense that they stand in causal relations, they have causal powers, yet they're not physical. Some people believe in that. I'm not saying whether I do or not, doesn't matter. The point is that Branson now is switching from abstract concrete to using the terminology of physical versus non-physical. And he says that non-physical things we count by identity, and that physical things we count by division, and that we have to count physical things by division. Now, here's the problem with this, folks. That doesn't get any better. Why? Are the persons of the Trinity, according to Branson, Jay Dyer, and Nick, are they physical entities? Are they spatial or physical entities? No, they're not. So if the persons of the Trinity are not physical or spatial entities, then they would count by identity, which means it would count as three persons. But also, since they're not physical entities, they would count as three gods. So if you went with the physical, non-physical distinction and saying that non-physical entities are counted by identity, then you would have three persons, three gods, and multiple attributes. So any way you try to slice it, guys, Brother Jake has you covered from all angles. That's the reality. And I've been doing this for several years now. They have no response. And I'm just showing you this, that this is nothing new. I've been working these boys over for years. Now listen to how Branson tracks my argument. And it's not only Branson. Look on the screen. You see on the screen here, guys, let me make this big screen so it's a little bit better, right? It says Muslim claims against Christians. Basically, Jake's claims against Christians. Counting should only ever be done by identity. That's how everyone counts. They're attributing that to me. Counting by division is a modern invention. I've never claimed that. Christians are inconsistent in applying counting methods. That I claimed, and that's my primary objection. Count by identity when enumerating divine persons. Exactly, that's what they do. And Branson and Jay admit this. And the people here from, what are they called again? Anyway, it doesn't matter. The other people who were on the panel, I forget their names. Jay, Branson, and these people, they count divine persons by identity. But then they count by division when enumerating the number of divine beings. This is the objection. Now, Nick's response is, no, Jake, we're counting both persons, attributes, and gods or divine beings by division. Well, Jay Dyer and Branson aren't saying that because they're not as dumb as Nick. They're pretty sharp. So they're saying, yeah, Jake, you're right. We are counting divine persons by identity, but we're counting divine beings by division. And then the question is, well, do they have a principled way for accounting for that? Why they count one thing by one method and one thing by another? And they don't. And that's what I just exposed. Whether it's the abstract concrete distinction or the physical non-physical distinction, either way, it breaks down for them. Okay. Then says switching counting methods to avoid saying that there are three divine beings. Exactly. That's what they do. They just don't want to verbalize saying that there are three divine beings. That's why they switched to counting method. And we're going to see Branson basically admit this in the next clip. Okay. So let me go to my notes and let's skip forward here in the video. I hope that people are being educated here, especially my Muslims. I don't want you guys using bad arguments or misusing my material. Okay.
If it didn't, like, even if you just kind of see the point, it's not clear to me like how this actually matters, because I mean, like, we kind of, you know, as shorthand, like, we will express the doctrine of the Trinity by saying there's these three hypostases, but they're one God. But suppose that you said, oh no, okay, well, you got to say that they're really one hypostasis. Like, it seems to me like the only theological point, as far as I can tell, that we really want to say is just that they're not identical. Like, the Father's not just identical to the Son, the Father's not identical to the Spirit, the Son isn't identical to the Spirit. Like, they're just not identical. So if you say, like, well, okay, you can say that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are not identical, but, you know, you still have to, like, call them three. You have to call them one hypostasis instead of three. Like, I mean, okay, but anyway, they're not identical. I mean, like, all we want to say is they're not identical, but they're just one God.
That's
like,
a good point. You get like a non-substantive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it just
issue.
doesn't seem like it just seems like you're kind of saying, well, you need to express the doctrine differently. I feel like this happens a lot, like with Muslims and like some Unitarians I've interacted with and stuff, where people will try to just like get this kind of verbal result. It's just like, well, but if you look at the result of the whole thing, it's just like, well, the picture is fine, like the actual substance of the idea ends up being like just fine. You're just kind of complaining that you should express it differently or something, and it just seems like, why are we? It just seems like a silly thing to argue about.
No,
Yeah.
it's not a silly thing to argue about at all, because see, he's dealing with my objection here, right? Which is, the objection is, if you count the persons by division by the same method, then you would have to say that there's only one person in the Trinity, even though they are discernible or distinct from one another, right? And in that case, he says, oh, but then that's just a semantic dispute. Well, hey, buddy Branson, then that would mean, yeah, it's just a semantic dispute about whether or not there's one God or three gods, because we are agreeing with you about the content. You're saying Father's God, Son is God, and Holy Spirit's God, and they're distinct from one another. So if we count them by identity, we're saying that they're three gods. So we want you to express it differently and admit that there are three gods. In the reverse, why are you willing to concede and admit to saying, oh, we'll express the doctrine differently, and instead of saying that there are three persons, we'll say that there's only one person? So then why don't you do the reverse instead? And instead of just saying that there's only one God, admit and say that there are three gods. That shows the inconsistency. See, what the Christians are doing, they're more willing to admit that there's only one person in the Trinity rather than admitting that there are three gods in the Trinity, which is actually still a semblance and part of the fitrah. They don't even want to voice that there are three gods. They don't want that to come out of their mouth that there are three gods, but they will be willing to admit that there's only one person. Why is that? Think about it, guys. Think about it. You see how Brother Jake is breaking this down for you guys, inshallah? Hopefully you appreciate it, because you won't get this on other channels. I'm just being quite frank with you. You won't get it. So it is what it is, for better or worse. I'm sitting up here reading these books and trying to bring this information to you guys. Nobody is wasting their time reading this foolishness, and rightly so, because nobody's as crazy as I am to actually read this stuff, to be able to break this down for you guys. Okay. Let me see if there's any other clip in here that was relevant. Not really. I think that's pretty much it from that video. Now I want to go to these details about counting by division versus counting by identity, because it's clear that Nick has no idea about the difference. Okay, so I'm going to go to the big dog, Branson himself, and this is the most recent publication where Branson speaks about this. One God, three persons, four views. McIntosh, who's the editor of this, and Branson, who wrote in this book. And I actually shared my arguments with Dale Tuggy, which he partially used, but I would say not as forcefully as I have explained here in the video. Now, this is from Branson on page 76. And I didn't just read this after the debate, guys. I read this a long time ago before, low-tier donuts like Nick were coming on the scene, okay? This is page 76. Now, it says here, this is a verbatim quote. He defines what it means to count by division. So this isn't Brother Jake putting this into people's mouth, okay? It says, to say we count by division, Branson says, is to say that the number of F, in this case gods, is given by how Fness, or divinity, godhood, is, or the Fs are, or can be, listen, divided into spatially discontinuous parts with the same name, F, as each other and as the whole. This view of discrete quantity as supervening on divisibility is discussed extensively by Aristotle and his commentators and was accepted by everyone from, and then he just names a whole bunch of names, right? And then he says, in short, it was taken for granted from antiquity through the Middle Ages as counting by identity is today. So he admits that counting by identity today is taken for granted, but Branson is making a historical claim that all of the ancients, including Muslims, Christians, Greeks, and otherwise, everybody counted by division, not by identity. He says this, and then he continues on further. But here, the key thing is, to say we count by identity is to say that the number of Fs is given by how Fness, or the Fs, are or can be divided into spatially discontinuous parts with the same name, F, as each other and as the whole. And then in the footnote, he says, for details, see Branson, and he gives some references, and he says, for more background, blah, 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 blah. Nothing really relevant there. Okay, so that's how he says counting by division. Counting by division is basically counting things as more than one by the name that is being ascribed to them, if and only if they can be divided into spatially discontinuous parts, meaning that Father and Son would count as two gods if they could be spatially divided. If they cannot be spatially divided, they count as one God. Okay? That's what he's saying. Now, he contrasts that with counting by identity. Okay? Let's see if I can bring that up here. He says on the previous page, this is on page 75, excuse my chicken scratch, okay? He says, introductory logic textbooks take for granted that we count by identity. So you know all those people talking about logic, FOL, first order logic, SOL, second order logic, all this? What does Branson say? Introductory logic textbooks take for granted that we count by identity. Oh, boom, boom. Mark that down, Omar. I know you're compiling information on that topic. Mark that down. Introductory logic textbooks take for granted that we count by identity. Now go read Branson's PhD thesis, and you tell me if he understands formal logic or not, okay? However, he says, from Aristotle through the end of the medieval period, it was thought we count by division or divisibility. Only in the 20th century did the current approach become dominant. And now he explains what it means to count by identity, because he told you what it means to count by division. To say we count by identity is to say the number of F's, i.e. in this case gods, is given in terms of logical subjects, terms, or variables that can have F predicated to them. In other words, Father and Son are predicated with God or divinity, and are not such that each is non-identical with every other. In other words, Father and Son both bear the predicate God, and yet they are not identical with the others who are called gods. In that case, they would count as three gods. Those are my own words that I'm adding there at the end. Okay, and then he says here in the footnote, more precisely, each of the things represented by the distinct terms or variables are non-identical with every other. In other words, Father and Son are each God, but Father and Son are not identical. So by identity, they would count as two gods. And Branson freely admits this. This is why he says to solve the LPT, we must count by a relation other than identity. And in his PhD thesis, he calls this the NCI family, or non-classical identity counting family. Okay. So this is it. This is from pages 75 and 76. Now, the reason why Branson is busted additionally to the inconsistency of the counting method, which we couldn't even get to that with Nick because he didn't even understand the difference between counting by division and counting by identity, is that Branson is making a historical claim that all of the ancients, including Muslims, Christians, Greeks, and otherwise, counted by division unanimously across the board. Now, the problem with that is that the Trinitarian Christians have always said that there are three persons in the Trinity. How did they say that they were three persons in the Trinity? If the persons cannot be divided by time or space and are indivisible and inseparable, then if they counted those, the ancient Trinitarians of the 4th century counted them by division, they would have to say there's only one person. But they counted them as three persons, which shows that they counted the persons by identity, which refutes Branson's historical claim. So we got you busted on the logic. We got you busted on the semantics. We got you busted on the counting. We got you busted on the historical claim. We got you busted all over the place. Pause. No diddy. So you guys are barbecue chicken. You're done. You're baked. Plain and simple. Now, is it only Brother Jake who's saying this? No, also Dale Tuggy in the same book, which I quoted in an academic article that I wrote, which was actually graded by one of my professors, a Trinitarian Christian. Guess who? Ryan Mullins. He graded my paper, and you know what he gave it? 100. Again, this is not to pat myself on the back, but it's to show that unlike Nick, I have actually engaged with the scholarly material on the subject. Now, I'll show you this from my article. Okay, this is my article, which was written long time ago before Nick. Okay, this is my article here, The Logical Problem of the Trinity and Proposed Solutions. Okay, now I want to scroll down here, second here, to let's just show the Branson, Mr. Branson. Okay, let's see if we get down to the part here. So look, Branson, this is Branson's critique of Craig and Hasker. He says basically if they don't appeal to another alternative counting method, they can't solve the LPT. So I say Branson argues, and rightly so, that if Craig and Hasker, who are the other two Trinitarians in this book, And proponents of the ES, meaning the equivocation solution, which is the same position that Joshua Sijiwade was trying to defend, which I buried him on as well and showed him that he didn't escape their three gods. And then he got butthurt when I said that his his argument, what did he call it again? The modesty argument of God, that, oh, Allah can't be God because he calls himself, El-Kabir too many times. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. But anyway, that solution cannot avoid there being three gods, right? He says, and if proponents of the equivocation solution aspire to solve the LPT, these are my words, then there is much more work required if they do not appeal to the alternative counting method that Branson endorses. As Branson mentions in another passage, and I quote, finally, these are Branson's words, finally, barring an alternative view of counting, ES, meaning the equivocation solution, can't solve any version of 3G, three gods problem anyway. For given ES, the equivocation solution alone, although there's a sense in which there's only one God, the Trinity, or in the case of Joshua, the Father, there's also a sense in which there are three gods, the persons. And we cannot downplay that sense. It's the only sense in which the Father, Son, or Spirit is God. There's a good sense in which there are three gods. In other words, Branson is admitting that if you count the persons as gods in the Trinity, then they would have to count as three gods. So to avoid that, you must appeal to some alternative counting method. It doesn't have to be division. If you want to come out with your own counting method that's different than division, that's different than identity, bring it forward and analyze it and see if you're consistent with it and see if it's actually makes any sense. So Josh has the same problem, which I note. And then I'll scroll down here and I'll show you my critique of Branson. Okay. So here I say, one proponent of IRIT, which stands for Impure Relative Identity Trinitarianism, don't worry about that. Bo Branson argues that Trinitarians should solve the LPT by counting gods by division instead of identity. Branson claims that the ancients unanimously counted by division, and I give the reference. That's what I was quoting from here earlier. However, Branson freely admits that today we count Fs by one, and I read this direct quote to Nick during the debate and discussion, logical subjects that are two discernible from, or at least not identical to one another and are F. That is, if X and Y differ in any way and are both F-ish, we count them as two Fs. In other words, if Father and Son are each God and they differ in any way, meaning they're not identical, they're discernible from one another, they're distinct from one another, then that means it would count today as two gods. Branson freely admits this. In other words, according to Branson, we count by identity today. There are several moving parts in Branson's theory regarding the term God being an agent noun and the inseparable actions of the persons of the Trinity add extra directed towards creation. However, for present purposes, we will focus on Branson's theory of counting by division as a solution to the LPT. In addition to Branson's historical claim that the ancients, including the biblical authors, counted by division, Branson attempts to motivate this theory of counting by division by asserting that this counting method solves paradoxes that counting by identity cannot. Unfortunately, space does not allow for a complete treatment of said paradoxes and the proposed solutions to these paradoxes. However, it suffices to mention that Branson's claim that these paradoxes cannot be solved by counting by identity is controversial, to say the least, and I show Tuggy basically responding to that claim. On Branson's theory of counting by division, two things can count as one thing, even though they are not identical to each other, so long as they are not separated by time or space. In this respect, Branson's view can be viewed as affirming numerical sameness without identity. In other words, they count as one thing, even though they're not identical. A view held by Ray Brower and others. Following Gregory of Nyssa, Branson argues that the term God is an agent noun. Since the persons of the Trinity share one undivided action directed towards creation, they count as one God/divine agent. Branson's theory of divine action seems challenging to harmonize with the incarnation and the apparent meaning of biblical passages such as Jesus' baptism scene. However, regardless of Branson's theory of divine action, Branson grants that an individual with a divine nature counts as a God. Of course, it's sufficient if an individual possesses divine nature, he counts as God. So, how does Branson avoid tritheism if the three divine persons fully possess a divine nature? Branson argues that since the divine persons cannot possibly be separated by time or space, they must count as one God. Only separable or divisible entities should be counted as numerically distinct, or more than one. Now, I show you the problem which I brought to Nick, which he went over his head like a kufi, or maybe it should go over his head like a kufi if he converts to Islam, inshallah. May Allah guide him. A noticeable problem results from Branson's counting theory, which relates to Branson's earlier claim that the biblical authors did not count by identity. If we count objects by division or separability, as Branson urges, then the persons of the Trinity should be counted as one person, not three. In Branson's view, the persons of the Trinity cannot be separated by time or space. Therefore, the divine persons should be considered numerically the same, even though they are distinct. The mere fact that there are three divine persons in the Trinity in classical Trinitarianism refutes Branson's claim that the ancients did not count by identity. Given this fact, a further problem ensues for Branson's model. What is Branson's justification for counting divine persons and divine attributes by identity, which Nick couldn't clock, but gods by division? Branson fails to provide an answer to this question, which renders the theory ad hoc and unprincipled. To remain consistent, Branson should count both gods and divine persons by identity, resulting in three gods and three divine persons. Alternatively, Branson could count both gods and divine persons by division, which would entail that there is one God and only one divine person. Branson would likely opt for the second of the two alternatives to avoid tritheism or any resemblance to ST, meaning social Trinitarianism. However, the second option collapses into modalism. Regardless, both Branson and classical Trinitarians count the persons by identity, even though they are inseparable via the doctrine of perichoresis, or the mutual indwelling of the divine persons. If Branson desires to persuade proponents of social Trinitarianism or anti-Trinitarian skeptics like Tuggy of the validity of this proposed solution, then Branson must provide us with a principled explanation as to why we should count divine persons and divine attributes by identity, but gods by division, which Nick, I couldn't even get to that part with because he didn't even understand that he's counting persons and attributes by identity, not division. Unless and until Branson succeeds, this remains a devastating criticism of Branson's proposed solution and the claim that the ancients only counted by division. Tuggy argues similarly, stating, and it's because I gave him this argument. He says in the same book, okay, how is it supposed to be that the Trinitarian knows that the Father and Son are not the same divine person? It is by simultaneous differences. Example, the Son is crucified, but the Father is not. Here we apply the principle called the distinctness of discernibles, and it goes hand in hand with counting by identity. The anti-modalist premise of Trinity theories commits the Trinitarian to counting by identity. In other words, Tuggy is saying, hey, Branson, you're making the claim that the ancients didn't count by identity at all, but there are three persons in the Trinity, and how do you count them? You count them by identity. So that disproves your claim, okay? As mentioned earlier, models other than Branson's fall under impure relative identity Trinitarianism. However, they all share the proposed solution of counting gods by a relation other than identity, which is the standard and intuitive method by which we count today, which Branson has freely admitted. Other proponents of this view must also attempt to provide a convincing answer to why they count divine persons and attributes by identity, but gods by some other relation. Otherwise, their proposals will appear ad hoc and unprincipled, just as Branson's proposal currently stands. Impure relative identity has an advantage over its rival, pure relative identity Trinitarianism, because besides counting gods by a relation other than identity, the pure view denies classical identity altogether, which is a highly controversial and unnecessary addition to impure relative identity. On the other hand, impure relative identity also has an advantage over its rival, social Trinitarianism, because it at least attempts to answer why there is not three gods in any sense, even if impure relative identity, at the end of the day, is unsuccessful in its attempt. So this is from my article, which Mullins has reviewed and given me 100 on in my master's program. Okay. So back here, guys, after that long-winded explanation, now what I'm going to do here, let me just make sure I don't have anything else here. Okay. Now I'm going to go to the second part of the discussion. So Nick is already buried. He's barbecue chickened. He doesn't know what ontology means. He doesn't know what counting by division means. He doesn't know what counting by identity means. He doesn't have a principal counting method to explain once he recognizes that he counts persons and attributes by identity and gods by division. He doesn't have a principled way of explaining that. I showed that Branson don't either, even if you go with the abstract concrete distinction or the physical non-physical distinction. They don't have any way. Or God versus creation distinction. None of it is consistent. They don't have any consistent way. So after I buried Nick, he tries to get a gotcha with, oh, Jake believes in 99 ontologies within God, because he's a bozo and he doesn't even know what ontology means. So, but I'll break this down and show you guys how Nick is further stupefied. Okay, let's take a look.
I say
Logical.
a property is
Can it subsist in ontology?
doesn't.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so is a property ontological?
It can subsist in ontology. It itself is not ontological.
A property is not ontological.
No, properties aren't just necessarily ontological. Wait,
What are they?
you think properties are all ontological?
What are they?
So do you think that Allah has 99 different ontologies?
He said properties are not ontological, which I just read from you from that article, which clearly says that ontology is the study of properties, all different categories of existence. Anything that exists has ontology. If the property exists, then it has ontology. It's ontological. But he's just foolish. He doesn't know.
I think that he has we don't say 99, those are referring to the names, but I believe that Allah's attributes
His face is like, I mean, all he has is rhetoric, man. This guy has nothing, honestly.
are real. They're referring to the names, but I believe that Allah's attributes are real. They're ontological. Yes.
So there, I say, I believe that Allah's attributes are ontological in the sense that they're real. They're real. And I'm going to show that Nick not only believes in 3 gods, Nick believes in an infinite amount of gods according to counting by identity. I'm going to show you that. Whereas I don't. He can't bring that argument against me.
Does God have a bunch of different ontologies?
He says, does God have a bunch of different attributes? Then of course, no problem.
God has multiple real distinct attributes.
Are
Now,
they different
back to my
ontologies?
point, they're not the same.
So
Yeah.
God has more than one ontology?
God has multiple distinct real attributes. Don't you believe that?
Wait, I'm asking you, I want to be clear.
Because Nick believes in something called the essence energy distinction, which I'm going to educate his dumb ass on in just a second. Yeah, Turkish skeptic, you use that word, so now you're in trouble, brother. Now I'm using it. You're getting me in trouble. Stuck for the law. This dumbass Nick, who doesn't know what ontology means, thinks he's getting a gotcha because I admitted that Allah has more than one attribute. And in that sense, that the attributes are real, he has more than one ontological reality or attribute within him. Big deal. You think that's a gotcha? We Muslims have been saying this for years, right? Our scholars call the attributes haqa'iq, right? They are realities. And I'm going to show you that Nick's own scholars call them realities, and they mock people who say that they don't. Nick's own scholars mock people who say they don't call them realities. So Nick is going to be shown to be a heretic according to his own tradition. I'm going to show you this.
Do you think God has multiple ontologies?
When you say ontologies, what do you mean by that?
The same way you've been. So now suddenly you don't know what ontologies means?
No, because I explained
The
it.
same way you've been using it this whole time. Suddenly you don't know what it means?
No, I explained it to you 3 times, but now you're asking me the same question. I believe ontological means it has a reality.
Okay.
It has an actual reality. It's not something conceptual that's merely in the mind.
Great. Does God have
so yes,
multiple ontologies?
God has multiple real attributes that are not distinct merely in mind alone. They are ontologically distinct.
So
They are
clear.
really distinct from each other.
So I just want to be clear. God has, I just want to make sure I'm not strawmanning you. God has multiple ontologies, right? According to you.
In that case, all ontology means that God has multiple real distinct attributes. Yes, he does.
So notice, does God have multiple ontologies? God has multiple real distinct attributes. I repeated that at least 10 times in this exchange, at least. It hasn't been 10 times yet. It's probably been 3 or 4 times, but I repeat that at least 10 times throughout the discussion. So anybody who says, oh, Jake admitted to 99 ontologies, or Jake admitted to multiple ontologies, or Jake admitted to multiple gods, what did Jake actually say? Ontology just means anything that's real in this case, and God has multiple real distinct attributes, which Nick himself believes. But because I baked him so bad on the LPT and the Trinity in the beginning, at this point, he tried to switch to Islamic theology, which look at what the discussion is supposed to be about, Christianity and the Trinity. He tried to desperately switch it to that and keep it on that for the next 10 minutes until he kicked me off his stream and ran away. That's exactly what happened.
And what are they? What's the distinction between them? Wait, what's the distinction between them?
They're not identical.
What type of distinction, though?
Oh, come on, bro. Omar, you have to be better than this, bro. You say, wait, Mullins gave you 100, yet he himself holds to relative identity? Come on, dude. Don't be this low IQ. I don't want to have to call you low IQ, too. He could give me 100 on the paper, even if he doesn't agree with all of my points in it. Come on, dude. Come on, dude.
They're discernible from one another.
Great,
they are really
great. That doesn't
distinct.
tell me the type of distinction.
Yes, it does. It tells you they're really distinct, meaning they're not identical, but they're indivisible and inseparable from each other.
Great, but what kind of distinction, though? There's multiple kinds. Are you familiar with the different kinds of distinction?
Are you listening? I just told you it's a real distinction.
How are you using real? Are you using the scholastic term of real? Or are you using?
So now, look, now Nick is trying to question me about when I say that the attributes are real and they're distinct. What do I mean by that? They exist. They're not conceptual or only exist in the mind of creatures. They really exist. They have a real existence, right? And they're distinct, meaning they're not identical to each other. How much more easier can you explain it, or simply can you get this? And then people like Nick, who's trying to now question me about real distinction, and you'll see he brings up formal distinction. He thinks that I don't know what these terms mean. I'm going to show you guys videos where I was discussing this before Nick was even on YouTube. I was breaking all of this down.
Using more of an Eastern real.
My God. Now we're moving on to discussing Allah's attributes, which I, by the way, I have no problem with doing whatsoever.
Great.
But this is moving away. Hold on a second. This is moving away from the discussion at hand.
It's called a consistency argument.
And I am.
That is a consistency argument. But what does my position on Allah having multiple real attributes have to do with the LPT? He hasn't established what the relevance is.
Consistent. I count the attributes.
So I want to know.
The attributes. Hold on a second. I count the attributes. I count the attributes. I count everything within God. I count by identity. You don't do that. You're counting gods by division or separability, and then when it comes to persons or attributes, you're counting them by identity or discernibility.
Great. I just want to know, though. You haven't answered. I just want to know when you say real, are you? No, you have. I want to know. Are you using the scholastic term or are you using the Eastern term of real?
Am I using the scholastic term of real?
Yes. Are you using scholastic real distinction or Eastern real distinction?
What's the relevant difference?
You don't know the difference between a scholastic distinction in a
What Nick doesn't know, or maybe he's too stupid to know, which I'm going to show you from a genuine Catholic who I have this discussion with, is that these terms were not used all in the same manner by all different authors across the board. So I'm not going to commit to something until I know what Nick means by the terms that he's using. It's basically what's happening.
in a Eastern.
And by the way, I'm going to show you guys that in a second. I'm going to show you guys that. 1 second here. And by the way, I'm going to this just ran off here. Sorry about that, guys. 1 second. I don't know how that just went to the wrong thing. Here we go. Let me pull this back up.
You know what a
No.
scholastic real distinction is?
Dude, I have it right in front of me. I can literally read it for you.
Do you
Right
know what a
out-
scholastic real distinction
right-
is? Dude?
Yes, I do. And I can literally read it from you, literally right out of the dictionary of scholastic philosophy, which I have right in front of me.
Great.
But
So
you
are
are
you using a
totally-
scholastic
you are
real distinction? Or it should be easy.
You
then.
are totally moving away.
I'm glad you looked
from
up the dictionary.
subject.
I'm glad you looked up the dictionary. I'm asking you a question, okay? Are you
Nick,
using the scholastic or the
It's
Eastern?
obvious that you're moving away from the discussion.
Now, people are wondering, Jake, why aren't you going into detail in responding to this question? The reason is because Nick is using this as a decoy tactic to run away from the debate. That's why. But a lot of people who don't understand how debating works, it's not purely based on substance. Sometimes it's based on strategy and rhetoric, which Nick is trying to deploy now because I buried him so bad on the LPT. They don't understand that I'm trying to move back to the LPT because he desperately wants to get away from it. That's the point. That's why I'm not engaging and wasting time in this stuff. I have entire videos where I explain these distinctions in detail for 2+ hours.
I let you
Because-
talk about it for 20 minutes and I ask you one question and suddenly
Yeah.
you don't like it.
No.
Let's
It's
talk
because
about it.
You've been getting
just an
baked for
open
the past half
conversation,
hour,
dude. It's an
You
open
literally
conversation,
just said-
dude.
Yeah, exactly.
So I
It's
want you to
open
answer the
conversation,
question.
which I showed up here, by the way, because you guys were cowering on and on all day, going back and forth.
Cowering? I emailed you 10 minutes after you emailed me and you haven't emailed me back yet. What are you talking about, dude?
Dude, you guys were literally on a live stream today.
And I told
Going
you, and I
through
told
other
Speaking to tell you to come through and you
going-
didn't.
Yeah, because I was busy. You think I
Okay,
just
so now who's
come on here,
cowering? So
man?
who's cowering? If I'm
No,
in the
you
live,
guys were the
and
ones
if
that
I'm
were
in a
on
live in
and
front
on
of 500
talking
people
about it.
saying, get Jake, and he don't come, how am I the one cowering?
You're not getting the point. You guys were going on and on talking about it. That's the point. I came here
Because you
I'm
wouldn't
not worried-
come or you
I'm
wouldn't
not
email me back. So I
You
had
know,
to talk to
we
your
emailed you
minions
back.
because you wouldn't email me back.
No, because we were going through a third party who was supposed to be hosting the discussion, which I have no control over.
You
Who's
could have
another
just
Christian
emailed me
person.
back, dude.
Anyway, back to the point.
Anyways, I want you to answer the question.
You haven't answered the question.
I've
You've
been answering your
running in
questions for
circles.
20 minutes now, dude.
Has Nick answered the question? Has he he attempted to? I'll be fair. He attempted to, and he just spewed absolute nonsense. But has Nick successfully answered the question of how he's actually counting the attributes and persons by division? No, not at all.
Dude, I just
You've
wanted you to
been
answer if it was scholastic or
you've
Eastern.
literally been running in circles for the past 30 minutes
I've
without
been
even
answering
realizing
all
it.
your
You
questions,
don't
dude.
understand the point.
This is an open discussion. I don't know when it comes
Yeah, it's an open discussion, and you didn't get the discussion, dude.
to Islam. Y'all just don't want to talk about it for some reason.
Is it that I don't want to talk about Islam, or is he having a panel where he's challenging people, including Muslims, to come on and discuss the Trinity? But once I'm baking him on the Trinity, he starts to now try to discuss Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his attributes with me. That's what's happening. You're switching to that because you got busted.
No,
So
because
what kind of distinction
hold
is
on
it?
a second. The question is, Christianity and the Trinity are logical.
Oh my God.
Prove me wrong.
Yes,
So
and
that's
it's an
what I came
open
up here to
discussion.
discuss.
We talked
Now,
about it
here's the thing.
for
Here's the
20
thing.
minutes.
If you want to have a discussion on Islam, then you can come on my panel and talk to me about it.
We're talking about both right now. Let's critique each
No,
other's
because
views. We're
you
talking
haven't-
about both.
You haven't even gotten past the fundamental step.
We literally already talked about it. So,
You just went through telling me that properties are not ontological.
oh my God. So we're
That's
talking
what you
about
just
that. So
said.
that's what great. So
In
we're
the
talking
case-
about that.
And in the case of the Trinity, the personal properties or the hypostatic properties that they possess, they are ontological.
Okay, great. We're talking about that. So I
Yeah,
asked you,
so
then
if
when you
they
said that they're
are
really
ontological,
distinct,
if
are you
they
using
are
the scholastic or the
ontological,
Eastern term?
If the personal properties or the hypostatic properties are ontological, therefore that is what is accounting for them being distinct or counting as more than one person.
Great.
You're not counting them by
gosh.
division.
Great.
because
And
the
you say that
personal
they're
properties-
ontologically really
the
distinct.
personal properties
Are you? I want
not
to understand
divisible or
what you're
separable
saying.
from each other.
You said they're really distinct. I want you to understand what you're saying. Are you saying they're
What
scholastic?
are
Are you
real-
using the
what are-
scholastic term or the Eastern term?
What are really distinct?
The attributes.
He asked me what do I mean by really distinct. I explained it to him literally several times. What does it mean for them to be really distinct? What it means for them to be really distinct is that they're not identical, but they're inseparable. How dumb are you? I'm going to show you this from your own scholastic manuals where it says this. But he doesn't know the difference between a real distinction, according to the Thomists, and what SCOTUS means by the formal distinction. Don't worry. I'm going to educate all of you guys, including Nick. He's going to get a free lesson, inshallah. Bismillah.
In your understanding?
No,
or
in
not?
yours. Are you using the scholastic term of real or are you using the Eastern term?
Am I using the scholastic term of real, which only has one meaning, right? Only has one meaning. I'm going to show you that there's a real. He has no idea about that.
I'm using the term of real in the sense that they are not identical, but cannot be separated.
Great. So great. That all that tells me is they're distinct in some way. I'm asking, are you using this? Because you already said you know it, so it should be easy. Are you talking about the scholastic or the Eastern side of real?
No, I didn't say that. I said to you.
It's a question. I didn't say you said anything. I asked you a question.
I said to you by real distinction, and I just explained it very clearly to you. By real distinction, I mean that they are not identical. They are discernible from one another. However, they are not separated.
All that means is there's a distinction. All that means is a distinction. But there's like 10 different.
That doesn't mean that there's a distinction. That means it's a real distinction. You bozo.
Types of distinctions that could be, which is why I'm asking, are you using the scholastic term of a real distinction or an
Which one is
Eastern?
relevant? How is that relevant responding to the LPT? You
Bro,
explain
it's
that.
relevant because it's a consistency
He says
argument.
it's a consistency argument and it's relevant, but he hasn't actually demonstrated what the relevance is to the objection that I brought up the entire time about the fact that Nick claims he's counting attributes and persons by division, but he's really counting them by identity.
So I'm asking
And
you
you're not
again.
explaining how it's how am I being inconsistent?
Bro.
How am I being inconsistent with counting the with counting the persons and the attributes and gods in the Trinity by distinction as more than one? Hold on a second. And in the case of my understanding of God as counting the attributes as more than one. How is that inconsistent?
I'm showing you if you would tell me so I don't
He's saying it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent for Jake to count attributes in the Trinity, persons in the Trinity, and gods in the Trinity by identity, to say there's three persons, three gods, multiple attributes. And Jake is counting attributes within Allah as more than one because they're distinct, not identical. I'm counting them by identity. Therefore, I'm counting them all by the same relation as identity, not by division. So how am I being inconsistent? I'm not at all. But because this idiot still does not know the difference between counting by division and counting by identity, he thinks he's onto something, or he's just purposely trying to divert to another topic about Islam because he knows he cannot respond to my initial objection.
Strawman you, what type of real distinction you're using? Are you using Scholastic or Eastern?
Neither.
So which kind?
I already explained to you what I'm using. I said
Neither.
that the attributes are distinct from one another. They're not identical. They're discernible from one another, but cannot be separated by time or space.
So then why is it not a formal distinction?
So who's the first one who mentioned formal distinction? I hope you're listening, G1. Take some notes while you're at work tonight, buddy, while you're doing your security work or whatever you're doing. Take some notes. Because you're the one that said that I claimed that I was appealing to a formal distinction, when in fact, I said I wasn't doing that at all. And then Nick attributed a formal distinction to my view based on what I just said. And then I don't care about the labels. I care about the content. So you'll see where it goes.
Formal distinction, that's a scotistic term.
Yeah, why is it not a formal distinction?
I didn't say that it was or it wasn't. I defined for you what it is.
So is it
I
real?
defined for you what it is, because unlike you, I'm not concerned with the wording. I'm
Dude,
concerned
bro,
with the
bro, I
content.
don't even feel like you know
concerned
these.
with
Do you know
I'm
what's
concerned with the
Bro,
I'm concerned with the content of what you're saying, and I'm also concerned with the consistency of the content of what I'm saying.
Dude, I'm be honest, I don't think you know what you're talking about. What's the difference between a real and a formal distinction?
Oh my God.
Come on, you don't need a nervous laugh. What's the difference?
You think that I don't know the difference
Answer the
between
question.
a real and formal distinction.
Answer the
I know
question.
what the difference is.
Then answer
I
the
don't
question.
I believe that
Then answer the question instead of trying to hurry up and look it up.
I'm not. I'm answering you if you would shut up for a
Great,
second.
answer the question. Difference
I'm
between real and
answering you
formal.
that I believe that a formal distinction is a type of real distinction.
So what's the difference?
The difference, it depends on whose definition you're looking at.
What is the difference?
Which he doesn't know. He doesn't know that it depends, because some people view the formal distinction differently than others, right? He has no idea about this dispute.
SCOTUS and the SCOTUS and the Thomists don't agree about this. That's the whole point.
Okay, what's the difference between the SCOTUS formal distinction? So we'll just pick one. I'll pick a random. What's the difference between a SCOTUS formal distinction and a real distinction?
The SCOTUS formal distinction is basically equivalent to what I just said, that two things are not identical, they're discernible from one another, even if they can't be separated by time or space.
So there's no distinction between a real and formal distinction in the SCOTUS view?
I didn't say that. You asked me what the formal distinction is, and I just defined it for you.
What is the difference between it's very I don't know why you can't answer. What's the difference between a real?
How stupid are you? You're not.
You haven't. What's the distinction between what's the difference between a real distinction?
You keep going to asking me about
because you can't answer. This is crazy.
I did.
What's the difference between a real distinction and a formal distinction?
I just told you what it is.
What is it then?
I just told you that a formal distinction is what I just described, that a distinction, meaning it's discernible or not identical, but cannot be separated.
That's the same thing you defined a real distinction as. Is it not?
Oh boy.
Is that not the same thing you just described a real distinction as?
Hey, did you not hear me where I said that I believe my personal position is that a formal distinction is a type of real distinction? Did you clock
You
that?
said a type. That means there's a difference, no?
Yeah, there are differences.
So tell me the difference.
There's a real distinction. How? I don't understand.
This is crazy. Tell me the difference.
I don't understand how dumb you actually are.
Bro, just tell me the difference.
You really are a complete moron.
All right, bro.
Another type of real distinction
Dude, thanks for coming on, bro. Is that your best?
So there you go. He kicks me off. He kicks me off because I was just about to explain to him that he has no idea, not only about the counting by division versus identity, he has no idea about this formal versus real, and according to who, and different authors. It's a very complicated discussion, right? Which he doesn't know, but I'm going to give him a free education in just a second. And I'm going to show you that this isn't me researching after the fact. I'm going to show you that I made videos on this topic before Nick was even on YouTube or TikTok, Okay. Well, he was still in diapers.
Is that your best hitter,
Here comes the
Islam?
rhetoric.
Bro, is that y'all's best hitter? Oh my God. That's who y'all was begging for me to debate? Is that who y'all was begging for me to debate? Is that who y'all were begging for me to debate, saying I was running from?
Well, what did you just do right there? You ran like a track star, dude. You ran like a track star. So let me show you this, Nick, because I was talking about this stuff before you were even on YouTube, bro. Let me show you. Let me go to this 1 second here. Sorry. Okay. Let me show you guys this. Let me show you guys Nick's page here. Okay, you see Nick's page? This is Nick's page, Fearless Truth, 231 videos. If you go to video section and you click oldest, you see what is this? 2 years. Nick's been on YouTube for 2 years. His oldest video was 2 years ago. Now I'm going to show you why I'm mentioning this, the relevance. This guy thinks I don't know the difference between real, formal, different types of real distinctions. Let me show you. Okay, look. I made this video. Let me show you this. Obviously, I can't go through the whole thing because it would take up way too much time. But this video on my channel, for anyone who's interested, was more than 2 years ago. It's called Catholicism, Divine Simplicity, and the Argument from Composition. I go over the differences between Thomas Aquinas, John Duns Scotus. I read from texts like this in the actual video, because I actually have hardcover books, unlike Nick. Right? And I read from them. Let me actually go to things where I discuss. Look, I show you guys all the time because, you know, you see these markups in here where I discuss this. And I literally read directly from these texts where I was talking about this, right? See if I can. Okay. So, and this person who wrote this, which is published by Routledge, okay, and you see this is 2 years ago, this video, I went into detail about the different types of distinctions. So to say I don't know what it is, no, I just didn't want you to waffle on and allow you to avoid the actual discussion that we were having, but then you ran away and you kicked me. So this is written by Richard Cross, who was one of my professors in my master's program, okay? On page 104, he says, Scotus believes that God's attributes are real constituents. They're constitutive of God, that they are in some way distinct from each other, and that each one is in some way distinct from God, too. Then he continues on the same page. More controversial in the context of 13th century theology is Scotus's attempt to show that similar distinctions must obtain between various divine attributes. According to Scotus, if wisdom in Socrates is distinct from, say, goodness in Socrates, then it must be the case that wisdom in God is distinct from goodness in God. Aquinas, for example, disagrees. Thus, while he denies that the words we use about God are synonymous, he denies that this entails that there are extra-mental distinctions in the thing to which we ascribe the various properties signified by the words. Scotus's position is that if nominalism about properties is false, then it must be so globally. Thus, if there are extra-mental distinctions between relevant creaturely properties, then there must be such distinctions between corresponding divine properties too. And then he continues on the next page, is what, 105? Scotus's spokesman for the nominalist strategy is Thomas of Sutton. According to Sutton, the distinction between and reality of the various attributes in God is simply the result of the way in which creatures understand God. And then he continues, right? So anyway, I went through all of this kind of discussion. And in that video well over 2 years ago. So I have this text here by Richard Cross as well, The Metaphysics of the Incarnation, another important work where he goes through some distinctions between Aquinas and what's his name, Scotus, and the different scholastic philosophers and theologians. Now, let me show you the thing that I was referencing actually during the discussion was I literally had this book right in front of me, Dictionary of Scholastic Philosophy, right, by Bernard Wellner, which I recommend. And on page 129, you'll see here, there's a breakdown of the types of distinctions. You see, divisions of unity, identity, and distinctions. Real, logical, and then it says formal, and it says Scotus in parentheses, right? But since you won't be able to see that as clearly, I'm going to show you this on the screen. 1 second here to help you guys out. This book is very helpful if you want to just get a quick definition of when these guys use mental, I shouldn't say it, but you know what, mental M, and they're just spewing nonsense. This will help you get a quick kind of definition for what a lot of these guys are talking about when they use these scholastic terms. But this is from a article or from a section from a text by Woodbury, okay, which let me scroll to the top for you guys. This was edited by Matthew Minard, who is a Thomist, okay. Austin Woodbury, Distinction and Divine Attributes Introduction, edited by Dr. Matthew Minard. If you scroll down here to this part of the text, okay, here, the Scotistic division of distinction, meaning there are different divisions of distinctions when you're talking about the Scotists, you're talking about the Thomists, all of these different things, and it's all wrapped up in a lot of terminology and terminological dispute, okay? So Nick wanted to go to this whole discussion, which had absolutely nothing to do with the original part of the conversation in counting by division versus identity. So the Scotistic division of distinction, Scotus and the Scotus propose another division of distinction, one that is not in agreement with the division that we have discussed heretofore, meaning the Thomistic one. According to Scotus, distinction is divided as follows. 1, a distinction not on the part of the thing itself, i.e. a mental distinction, and 2, a distinction on the part of the thing, meaning there are 2 types of distinction, one that's only in the mind or one that is outside of the mind, not only in the mind, but actually in the thing itself. And then in the thing itself, there's a further distinction between absolutely inseparable things, i.e. between 2 things whereof one of its nature and essence, before all benefit of the intellect, is not of the intrinsic and formal concept of the other, so that they are not identified in a formal sense, and consequently are formally divided, though they agree in the same reality and entity. Indeed, they agree so much that they cannot be separated even by an absolute power. This is an actual formal distinction on the part of the thing, right? Or a what? Real distinction. Or another type of distinction is between absolutely separable things, which is also a real distinction. So when Nick said, oh, I was saying that the formal distinction is a type of real distinction, yeah, I believe it's a type of real distinction between inseparable things. The attributes and God's essence are really distinct, meaning they're not identical to each other, but yet they are inseparable from one another. How many times did I literally repeat that in a discussion? And then when he said, oh, but that's just a Scotus's formal distinction, I said, if you want to call it that, I don't have to use that terminology. So be it. It's exactly what is being said here, right? Then he says further, the author, regarding this Scotistic division, let us note the following. Scotus's notion of a mental distinction is without intrinsic diversity of objective concepts, as well as an intrinsic foundation in the thing, as without an intrinsic foundation in the thing. Therefore, it corresponds to what the Thomists call a nominal or unbased conceptual distinction. So the terminology that Scotus uses is not the same as Aquinas, and is not the same as Palamas, and it's not the same as these different authors, right? So why do I have to get into this and breaking all of this down, which I've done several years ago in a several-hour video? I have to do this in a discussion with Nick because he's trying to run from the LPT? No. Okay? Therefore, it corresponds to what the Thomists call a nominal or unbased conceptual distinction. In accord with the principles operative in his exaggerated realism, Scotus thinks that every intrinsic diversity of concepts has a corresponding actual distinction in the thing, which is exactly what Richard Cross was just explaining about the univocity aspect, okay? Then he says, in accord with the principles operative, let me go further. This does not mean that this is always a distinction between diverse things, for when this does occur, we do have what he calls a real distinction. Wow. However, sometimes, at least on his account, he speaks of an actual formal distinction on the part of the thing when there are diverse formalities of the same thing. Accordingly, Scotus's simply real distinction is narrower than what the Thomists call a real distinction. In other words, for Scotus, the simply real distinction is not the same as what a Thomist calls a real distinction. For the Scotistic real distinction requires not only an actual distinction, i.e. actual lack of identity, which is what I said, in the real, or in other words, an actual foundation in the thing, but also separability, according to what cannot be separated by an absolute power. Meaning that for Scotus, a real distinction is going to imply the separability mentioned here. Okay? In contrast, the Thomistic real distinction requires only an actual distinction, an actual lack of identity, which is what I said, in the real, or in other words, an actual foundation in the thing. Therefore, it is found not only between separables, but also between inseparables. Okay? So I was using the term real distinction in this way that is categorized in the Thomistic sense over here, that there are two things, what? That lack an actual identity, right? But are inseparable from one another. Wow. So when you say that Jake didn't define it, I did. I used the term real distinction, and I said it's a real distinction in which what? There's an actual lack of identity in the foundation of the thing, really in the thing itself, but the two things are inseparable. That is a type of real distinction, and according to Thomas Aquinas. But Scotus would not say that that's a real distinction, right? Because for Scotus, right, there has to be separability in order for it to be considered a real distinction. So it's a dispute in terminology. The question is separability required for calling something a real distinction? Thomas Aquinas in the Thomistic school says no, that we can call something a real distinction if two things are not identical to each other, even if they're inseparable from one another. Scotus does not use the term real distinction in the same way. He says that in order for it to be a real distinction, they have to not be identical, but they also must be separable from one another. Therefore, for Scotus, what he's basically calling a formal distinction, two things that are not identical but are inseparable, for Aquinas, that in the Thomistic school, that's just a type of real distinction. And I agree with that. I agree with the Thomistic phrasing or usage of the term real distinction. But they're basically corresponding to the same thing, but using different words. Now, can I break all of this down in a concise manner when Nick is badgering me and running away from the LPT? No. But I didn't just learn this overnight, guys. I literally have videos where I'm explaining this for more than 2 hours, going into detail, explaining the difference between the Thomists and the Scotists. So I answered Nick's question. I said it's a real distinction, and I said it's a real distinction in which there's not identity, but there is not separation. And that is how, according to this, Woodbury and Minard, the Thomists understand real distinction. Okay? Now, for Scotus, he's not going to say that's a real distinction, because for him, in order for it to be a real distinction, there needs to be separability. But for Thomists, there doesn't. Right? Now, to give you a graph for people who are dumb enough to still be listening to Brother Jake, which is all of you people, hit the like button. Right? So this is, let me see if this is big enough for you guys. Let me make it bigger. Let me make it bigger, guys. How about this? 200%. Is that good? That's better, I think, right? All right. So here, or maybe that's a little too big, huh? Let's try the 150 spot. Yeah, that might be in the sweet spot there. All right. So these are the categories of types of distinctions. In the Thomistic doctrine, you have two main category separations of distinctions. You have real and you have mental. A real distinction is on the part of the thing. Okay? A mental distinction is not on the part of the thing. It's from the mind. It's not prior to the mind. It's not prior to the mind's activity. It's after the mind's activity, meaning it's not in the thing itself, it's in the mind. Okay? So you have a mental distinction, which is in the mind, right? And then you have the real distinction, which is in the part of the thing itself. Then in the Thomistic sense, you have two different types of real distinctions. And if this bozo allowed me to actually talk and answer the question, I could have told him. You have a real distinction in a Thomistic sense between inseparable things, which is what I said, Nick. So when you said I don't know the terms, I do. I was using real distinction in amongst inseparables, the attributes, okay? And then the other option is a real distinction between separable things, okay? So you have a division for the Thomistic understanding, mental and real. And then on the real side, you have a real distinction can be between things that can be separated and then things that cannot be separated. Okay. Then on the mental side, you have what's called a nominal distinction or a conceptual distinction. A conceptual distinction is with foundation in the thing itself. Okay. And then a nominal distinction, okay, a nominal distinction is without foundation in the thing. It's mental, I mean, it's not on the part of the thing at all whatsoever. It's purely in the mind. Whereas conceptual has supposedly a foundation in the thing itself. Okay, that's the breakdown from the Thomistic side. On the Scotistic side, you have the breakdown here. You have mental, which is not on the part of the thing. Okay, and then no further breakdown there. And then you have on the part of the thing, which is real for the Thomists, okay, because that encompasses both. And on the part of the thing, you have a real distinction, which is going to imply, as we saw earlier, where they discussed separability. And then you have what's called on the part of the thing, but an actual or formal distinction, which means that it has a foundation in the thing itself, but those things itself are inseparable from each other, right? So this is the breakdown. Now, do I have to go through all of this and explain it to Nick when none of that was actually directly related to the discussion about him counting by division or separability or identity? No, I don't. Okay. Now, to show you that, look, Brother Jake isn't just coming up with this now, let me play you a video where I'm actually discussing this whole thing about the difference between the Thomists and the Scotists in a conversation with Christian Wagner, who is a Thomist. Okay. And this is long before my discussion with Nick, or honestly, before I knew who Nick was. So let's listen. This is from several months ago.
There. So, and then the third famous one is the dispute between the Scotists, the Thomists, and the followers, which don't really exist anymore, of a medieval scholastic named Durandus. And this is over the distinction between the persons and the nature. So St. Thomas is going to say that the person and the nature, they're all going to say that the person and nature are not really distinct, because that's a dogma of the church. You can't deny that. But when it comes to St. Thomas is going to say that the person and the nature are what he calls a virtual distinction. And what Durandus is going to say is it's what he calls a modal distinction.
Sorry about that, guys. I'm not sure what happened there. Give me 1 second.
Durandus is going to say is it's what he calls a modal distinction. And what Scotus is going to say is he says it's what's called a formal distinction, which really this just kind of has to do more so with how they're going to think of divine simplicity and the way in which we talk about the distinctions between the attributes in God.
You mentioned about the difference between Aquinas and Scotus and the Scotists on the relationship between the essence and the persons, that Aquinas would see it, I think you said, as a mere virtual distinction, whereas I think you said Scotus would see it as a formal distinction. Now, in your mind, and I know that this is kind of gets into debates I've seen even amongst Catholics about how to understand this. How do you view Scotus's formal distinction? Because a lot of people are not, we can't just presume, especially with my audience, that they're familiar with a lot of these things. So I kind of want to try to break some of these things down when we use technical terminology. What do you make of Scotus's formal distinction? Do you think it reduces eventually? It's just really, in reality, it kind of just reduces to something like Aquinas would imagine of a virtual distinction? Or do you think that there is a real difference that they have in mind there? How do you make sense of that?
Well, I mean, I could either be nice to the Scotus or I could be polemical towards the Scotus here, but I guess I'll just be honest. That's always the best policy. So I think personally, and this is something which I believe Catholic magisteriology does really well of, which is why I was glad that you asked that first question, is I can say that there are mistakes in the other schools which would imply a denial of dogma without accusing them of denying dogmas.
Okay.
So I would say you can draw forward something as a conclusion from what they believe, because every error is going to eventually, because of the connection of truth, every error is going to imply other errors. So for me personally, so I would say, and this is what every one of the Thomist authors say, so it's just not me speaking on my own authority, or I'm not here to represent what I believe. They would say that the Scotist position ultimately is in opposition to the divine simplicity of God. Because
wow, did you hear that? Every Thomist says that ultimately the Scotist position, which affirms a formal distinction between the essence and the attributes, or the essence and the persons, that this is a denial of divine simplicity, or it is a violation of divine simplicity, according to Christian Wagner, who's a Thomist. Now, some Thomists who try to be more ecumenical will make excuses for the Scotists, right? But basically what you'll hear Christian Wagner say is that no, the formal distinction is not consistent with divine simplicity. And it's not consistent with the dogmatic teaching of the church. But Christian Wagner and other Thomists will admit that divine simplicity hasn't necessarily been dogmatically defined. And because of that, they say, and Christian will say this openly, he wishes it will be dogmatically defined in the Thomistic sense so that they can just finally declare the Scotists and the Franciscans as heretics. That's really what he wants. And that's really what an honest Thomist wants, because they don't believe that the formal distinction between the persons and the essence, or the essence and the attributes, they don't believe that that's consistent with divine simplicity. They don't at all. They think it's a rejection of divine simplicity. Okay? Now, I've been doing this. Let me tell you guys, I've been doing this since 91, son. Nick, you weren't even in diapers yet, brother. You weren't even thought of. This is light work for me. Now, do I look like I'm not conversant in this type of discussion when I'm literally asking Christian Wagner questions, responding to him, having my own input? Do I look like I'm not conversant? I know this material. I actually have studied with professors who've written books on SCOTUS. What have you done, Nick? You don't know your ass from your elbow, sir. With all due respect, you don't.
As the Council of Florence teaches, and this is repeating, I believe it's repeating the Fourth Lateran Council and also Second Leon. It says everything in God is one and the same unless or except there is a relation of opposition. Mm-hmm. So relation of opposition is talking about like Father's relation to the Son, and then the Father's relation, the Father and Son's relation to the Spirit. Those are relations of opposition. What follows from the procession. So unless there is that, and this is very common in the Fathers, which is why I'm very confused by Dr. Sijuade's position, but it's very common in the Fathers for them to say the only distinctions found in God are between the persons, which follow from principle and principled. Mm-hmm. So, which is obviously, prima facie seems like a very difficult position to hold, but this is something in line with the simplicity of God. So when we're talking about the simplicity of God, what we mean by this is there's no composition. And by composition, we mean a union of really distinct things insofar as they are really distinct. So like our body and soul are really distinct. So they're united, and therefore they are united insofar as they're really distinct. And this is going to imply composition. So we as humans, we're composite, we're corruptible, and this would, in accordance with Catholic argumentation, we would say that this would imply some sort of imperfection. So when it comes to the Scotist view, I cannot see how you can have a distinction which is before the intellect and on the part of the thing, unless it's going to imply some sort of real union between really distinct things insofar as they're really distinct. And therefore, this would imply some sort of composition and therefore imply some sort of imperfection. But I mean, to kind of get through the initial.
So Christian is admitting that in his view, according to the Thomistic understanding, the Scotistic view results in God being composite, composition in God, and imperfection within God. And it's not consistent with divine simplicity. He's admitting this.
Objection, because a lot of people will say, well, you say this for the Scotists who hold the formal distinction, but don't you hold that the persons are really distinct? Well, basically what a Thomist would respond to the Scotist on this is say, well, the persons are actually not united insofar as they are relatively opposed. They actually have a lack of union insofar as they are relatively opposed. They're only united insofar as they share the same deity, whereas you think the attributes are united insofar as they have this formal distinction. So therefore, your formal distinction would imply composition, whereas what other Catholic theologians say about the distinction between the persons, this would not imply composition, because composition is a little bit more than just things being really distinct from one another. It also implies, on top of that, some sort of union insofar as they are really distinct.
Mm-hmm. There seems to be, because Scotus and his followers are not going to say, yeah, we reject divine simplicity, right? They're not going to say that openly. Just as you're not going to say that you reject divine simplicity, you're going to say, yeah, we affirm it. But then you're going to have someone come along like Ibn Sina or Avicenna or some of the Islamic philosophers that did hold to it. And they're going to say, nah, but really, Christian, even for you guys, you have composition because it's enough for them that there is this real distinction between the persons. That's enough to get composition in their own mind. I'm not saying I agree. I don't agree because I believe in real distinctions within God. I believe his attributes are not identical to his essence. So I'm, even more so in that sense. So, and I've written a whole paper actually responding to Ibn Sina's composition argument. So I don't even agree with it to begin with. But I'm just saying, I want to point out for the audience that notice I'm saying this openly, right, in front of a Thomist, that I believe that there's a real distinction between God's essence, his attributes, and between the attributes themselves. I don't believe they're identical, but they're inseparable from each other, right? And that's a type of real distinction in the Thomistic understanding that I just explained, right? Non-identical, but also inseparable. There are different groups and different schools within Islamic theology as well as in Christian theology who will wear the label and say that they believe in divine simplicity, but they have different conceptions of that. They have different understandings of what that means and what is necessary for them to actually affirm or deny in order to be in line with divine simplicity. And what you're saying, and that's from your point of view, and fair enough, is that the SCOTUS position on the formal distinction between the essence and the persons is going to result from your point of view in some type of composition. I've actually seen some proponents of Thomism argue in the opposite way, and that's why I asked you the question initially, where they'll try to smooth things over. And I actually agree with you, by the way, about what you think SCOTUS's position results in. I would agree with that. But I've seen Catholics kind of go the other direction, try to really smooth it over and say, nah, really the formal distinction kind of just is like a type of virtual distinction that Aquinas has in mind. And so there's really not that much of a difference. I don't hold that view. I think if you really look at it more honestly, as you said, it's prior to the intellect and in the thing itself. So, I mean, what else would that be? It doesn't seem to really be. See that? It's prior to the intellect and in the thing itself. So I was defining this many months ago before this bozo Nick even came on the scene. So claiming I don't know what these terms mean is just laughable, bro. A mere virtual distinction. It does seem to be a type of real distinction.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Like for the virtual.
Hear that? What did he say when I was explaining it? Yeah, exactly. So Christian doesn't disagree with me. He understands, and we're conversant. We know what we're talking about.
Distinction. It's basic. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Like for the virtual distinction, it's basically the idea with the virtual distinction is there's a dual foundation. We talk about a twofold foundation of the virtual distinction. So on the one hand, there's a foundation in the poverty of our intellects. So the fact that we cannot understand something under one and the same concept, or we call it a ratio, not under the one and the same ratio. Whereas when it comes to the thing itself has a supereminent perfection to where it under one concept contains multiple different rationes or ideas or concepts, or however you want to put that word into English. So the idea would be, for example, this is the example that St. Thomas gives. It's the example that I always bring up. If you have a king, it's kind of hard to understand this in a Western context. But if we have a king, the king has executive, judicial, and legislative powers, and he is able to communicate these powers unto his lesser ministers. So his lesser ministers are going to have a part or share of his power, but in the king, it's just the one kingly power that eminently contains all of the lesser powers. So for us, we would talk about God pouring forth his perfections into creation, and there is goodness, beauty, and all of these different perfections among creatures, but in God, it just is the one single simple perfection, which eminently contains all of those lesser perfections. So that is a little bit different than the Scotus idea, which is the foundation is not merely in the eminent perfection of the thing, but actually on the part of the thing.
Yeah. There you go, guys. So that was a not long discussion, but discussion between Christian and I about the different types of distinctions among the Scotus and the Thomists and how it relates to divine simplicity. I made a video over 2 years ago about the subject, and I was referencing a paper I wrote, which is also on my academia page. It's called An Ethity Critique of Ibn Sina's Argument from Composition. So I speak about all of this from an Islamic paradigm, right? Ibn Sina, and I show basically Ibn Taymiyyah's text responding to this. And I gave both Arabic and English things that haven't even been translated into English in this article. So anyway, people can go look at that if they're interested for more details in responding to this argument from composition thing. Now, let me show you guys, like, you know how some of these bozos are going around saying, wait, Jake, you affirmed multiple ontologies within God? I affirmed multiple real distinct attributes within God, that they're real. They don't exist only in the mind. They actually exist in the thing itself within Allah. So he has real attributes that are not identical. They're not the same thing, right? And yet they're inseparable, right? So what's so hard to understand about that exactly? And can Nick legitimately attempt to make an argument against that, given that he's an Eastern Orthodox? No, he can't, and I'll show you that. Let's see. Okay, let me bring this up for you guys. Second here. Okay, 1 second. Okay, can you see this? Well, actually, I should make it a little bit bigger. It's 150. That should be all right. Okay, so this is from Gregory Palamas. This is a work called The Triads, very popular, famous work of Gregory Palamas. Gregory Palamas is seen like the Ibn Taymiyyah of Etherism or Salafism. Gregory Palamas is basically the equivalent of that in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, right? So he wrote a book called The Triads. This is edited with an introduction by John Meyendorff, very famous scholar, with the preface by Yaroslav Pelikan, who's another very famous scholar. This was published in the 80s, I believe. Where is it? Is it published in the 80s? Yeah, there it is. 1983 by Paulus Press. So this is a digital version, but it's the translation of the text. Now, let me, 1 second. Let me go to this. Let me just pull up the exact page for you guys. Okay, it's page 75 in the digital version. I just wanted to put it on the screen for you guys because I'm going to read you about 2 or 3 pages, which shows that if Nick has a problem with multiple realities within God, then he has just apostatized from Eastern Orthodoxy. Literally. So he has just declared himself a heretic, actually. And let's show that. And I'm going to show you the distinction between Palamas's view and Aquinas's view. Okay. So here, you see this is on page 75 of this version. Okay. And this is on the section Essence and Energies of God. This is Palamas. This is Nick's saint. Okay. This is Nick's Ibn Taymiyyah in that sense. Okay. Let me see if I make this a little bit bigger for you guys. If it's even better. How about that? How's that? I think that's good, right? Okay. So he says, I should like to ask this man why he claims that only the divine essence is without beginning. So Palamas is responding to someone or refuting somebody who thinks only the divine essence is without beginning. someone who believes in like complete divine simplicity in that sense. Whereas everything apart from it is of a created nature. And whether or not he thinks this essence is all powerful, that is to say, does it possess the faculty of knowing, of prescience, which is basically foreknowledge, of creating, of embracing all things in itself? Does it possess providence, the power of deification, and in a word, all such faculties, or not? For if it does not have them, this essence is not God. Basically, he's describing divine attributes and saying, if God doesn't possess these divine attributes, then he can't be God. Even though it alone is, for if it does not have them, this essence is not God, even though it alone is unoriginating. If it does not possess these powers, but acquired them subsequently, then there was a time when it was imperfect. In other words, was not God. However, if it possessed these faculties from eternity, it follows that not only is the divine essence unoriginate, but that each of its powers is also. In other words, he's saying that if God possesses these divine attributes, being all-knowing, all-powerful, wise, etc., then it must be the case that God possesses multiple faculties eternally, right? And there's the divine essence, which is unoriginate, but also all of these divine attributes are not originated, right? Then he continues, nonetheless, there is only one unoriginate essence, the essence of God, none of the powers that inhere in it. So the attributes inhere in the essence. Isn't that what some of these believe? Yeah. The attributes of God inhere in it in an essence, so that all necessarily and always are in the divine essence. To use an obscure image, they exist in the divine essence, as do the powers of the senses in what is called the common spiritual sense of the soul. Here is the manifest, sure and recognized teaching of the church. So Palamas is saying this is the teaching of the church. So take notes, Nick, because you rejecting this makes you a heretic, according to your own Eastern Orthodox Church. You can ask Jay Dyer that if you want. For just as there is only one single essence without beginning, the essence of God and the essences other than it are seen to be of a created nature and come to be through this sole unoriginate essence, the unique maker of essences. In the same way, there is only one single providential power without beginning, namely that of God, whereas all other powers are part of nature. And it is the same with all the other natural powers of God. It is thus not true that the essence of God is the only unoriginate reality, and that all realities other than it are of a created nature. Did you hear that, Nicky boy? Did you hear that, little Nicky? Like the Adam Sandler movie? I don't know if you guys know that. It is not. Listen to what Palamas says. Oh, Jake believes in multiple ontologies or multiple realities within God. What does your Gregory Palamas say, bozo? It is thus not true that the essence of God is the only unoriginate reality, meaning there are multiple unoriginated realities, multiple uncreated realities. What are they? The essence and all of God's attributes are not originated, and that all realities other than it are a created nature. He's denying that. Now he's going to bury you further. Let's do it, Palamas. My discourse, guided by the absolute and eternally pre-existing nature, now leads me to show the unbelieving that not only the divine powers, so he calls these people are unbelievers, right? They're kuffar. To show the unbelieving that not only the divine powers, which the fathers often called natural energies, but also some works of God, meaning the actions of God. So you have three things for Palamas. You have the essence, you have divine attributes, and then that are eternal, and then you have actions of God, which have a beginning in time, which he also says are uncreated. But also some works of God are without beginning as the fathers also affirm. So there are some acts of God that don't have a beginning and some that have a beginning, but all of them are uncreated according to Palamas, and they're not the same realities. For was it not needful for the work of providence to exist before creation, so as to cause each of the created things to come to be in time out of non-being? Right? He's asking the question. Was it necessary for a divine knowledge to know before choosing, even outside time? But how does it follow that the divine foreknowledge had a beginning? How could one conceive of a beginning of God's self-contemplation? And was there ever a moment when God began to be moved toward contemplation of himself? Never. There is therefore a single unoriginate providence, that of God, and it is a work of God. Providences other than it are of a created nature. Nonetheless, providence is not the divine essence, and thus the essence of God is not alone unoriginate. So there are multiple unoriginated realities according to Palamas, the attributes and the essence. There is, in the same way, only one unoriginate and uncreated foreknowledge, that of God, where foreknowledge is different from it. Those which we possess by nature all have a beginning and are created. There is also only one will without beginning, that of God, meaning God's attribute of will, whereas all wills other than it have a beginning. However, no one would dare to say that the essence of God is a will, meaning they're really distinct. The essence of the God is not the will, and the will is not the essence. The will is an attribute of the essence. It inheres in the essence, as he said earlier. Not even those who claim the word of God was a son of God's will. As for predeterminations, their very names show that they existed before creation. And should anyone wish to deny their existence before the ages, he would be refuted by Paul's words that God has foreordained before the ages. So he says they exist and they are realities. They are existences and realities, those attributes, and they're uncreated. These works of God, then, are manifestly unoriginate and pretemporal. His foreknowledge, will, providence, contemplation of himself, and whatever powers are akin to these. But if this contemplation, providence, prescience, predetermination, and will are works of God that are without beginning, then virtue is also unoriginate. For each of his works is a virtue. Existence is also unoriginate, since it precedes not only essence, but all beings, for it is the first existence. And are not will and predetermination virtues? The wise Maximus, referring to Maximus the Confessor, thus rightly says that, quote, existence, life, holiness, and virtue are works of God that do not have a beginning in time. And he adds, so that no one should think these things relate to this age, albeit in a non-temporal sense. There was never a time when virtue, goodness, holiness, and immortality did not exist. So these are existent realities within God, according to Palamas and him citing Maximus. He then makes this further observation, lest anyone should think the virtues in us are unoriginate. Things that have a beginning exist and are said to exist by participation in things unoriginate. For God is the creator of all life, all immortality, all sanctity, and all virtue, that is, of that which subsists in us by nature. Right? So our attributes subsist in us as well, according to him. Elsewhere, he states, these virtues are contemplated as qualities appertaining essentially to God, and are participable. Okay, and then he further says here, created beings participate in them, as do works of God that have an origin in time, but they themselves are works without beginning. For non-being is not anterior to virtue, he says, nor to any other of the realities. Wait a second, God has multiple realities with him? He has 99 realities with him? Wow, you're barbecue chicken, Nick. Nor to any other of the realities mentioned before, since they have God as the eternal and absolutely unique originator of their being. And so that no one should believe he is speaking of the super essentiality to which our intellect attains after having stripped itself of all created things, he continues, God infinitely transcends these participable virtues an infinite number of times. In other words, he infinitely transcends that goodness, holiness, and virtue which are unoriginate, that is, uncreated. So God has multiple unoriginated realities and entities which inhere in his essence and are uncreated, according to Palamas. Thus, neither the uncreated goodness, nor the eternal glory, nor the divine life, nor things akin to these are simply the super essential essence of God, for God transcends them all as cause. Meaning that God's essence is not identical to his goodness, glory, life, and all of these different things. So he calls them things, realities. He says that they have their own, that they have existence. So they're existences, realities, and things. But we say he is life, goodness, and so forth, and give him these names because of the revelatory energies and powers of the superessential. As Basil the Great says, quote, the guarantee of the existence of every essence is its natural energy which leads the mind to the nature, close quote. And according to St. Gregory of Nyssa and all the other fathers, so he's saying there's consensus on this, the natural energy is the power which manifests every essence, and only non-being is deprived of this power. For the being which participates in an essence will also surely participate in the power which naturally manifests that essence. But since God is entirely present in each of the divine energies, notice, so here's where you have the problem. You say that God is entirely present in each of the divine energies, and because of that, we name him from each of them. So each one of the energies is God, according to the Orthodox. Although it is clear that he transcends all of them, right? For given the multitude of divine energies, how could God subsist entirely in each without any division at all? And how could each provide him with a name and manifest him entirely, thanks to indivisible and supernatural simplicity, if he did not transcend all these energies? So there's a sense in which God is also transcending the energies, but the energies themselves are attributes and actions of God, and all of them, the ones that are eternal and also the ones that have a beginning in time, are all uncreated, and they're all uncreated realities, according to Palamas. Now listen to this part. This is going to hurt the Thomas out there. There are, however, he says, Palamas, energies of God which have a beginning and an end, as all the saints will confirm. He's claiming consensus. Our opponent thinks that everything which has a beginning is created. Let me ask you this question in the audience, and for Nick, do you believe that anything that has a beginning in time is created? Palamas says no. There are energies which have a beginning in time that are not created. He says our opponent thinks that everything which has a beginning is created. Palamas is going to contradict that, and I'm going to show you where Aquinas literally says this verbatim. This is why he has stated that only one reality is unoriginate. Wow. So the person who is the opponent of Palamas says that only one reality is unoriginate, meaning that Palamas doesn't believe that. He believes that there are multiple unoriginated realities, okay? But he says his opponent believes that there's only one unoriginate reality, which is what? The essence of God. Adding that what is not this essence derives from a created nature. That's what his opponent says. Then Palamas is going to refute him. But even if this man considers that everything that has a beginning is created, we for our part know that while all the energies of God are uncreated, not all are without beginning. All of the energies of God are uncreated, but not all are without beginning, meaning there are uncreated energies that have a beginning in time. Indeed, beginning and end must be ascribed, if not to the created power itself, then at least to its activity. That is to say, to its energy as directed towards created things. Moses showed this, meaning now he's using scripture to justify his position rather than just appealing to church fathers. When he said, God rested from all the works which he had begun to do, meaning God began, he's taking it in the literal sense, God began to do a particular action, and that action that had a beginning in time is uncreated. How then would the super essential one not be different from its proper energy? God's essence is different from its energy. But he asks, are the unoriginate energies identical with the super essential one? There are among them some which have an end but not a beginning, as Basil the Great has said concerning the prescience of God. The super essential essence of God is thus not to be identified with the energies, even with those without beginning, from which it follows that it is not only transcendent to any energy whatsoever, but that it transcends them to an infinite degree and an infinite number of times, as the divine Maximus says. Close quote. You are barbecue chicken, Nick. You are BBQ chicken, my dude. Why? Because Palamas teaches that God's essence is not the same reality, existence, or thing as his energies. God has an essence that's uncreated. He has energies or attributes, some of which are eternal, but all of them are uncreated. And then some which have a beginning in time and are still uncreated. He calls them realities, existence, things that inhere in the essence. Wow, so you're buried, Nick. So when you said, oh, Jake believes multiple ontologies within God, when I define for you that ontology means an existent thing, something that's real, that has existence. God's attributes are real. God's knowledge is not the same as his essence. God's power is not the same as his knowledge. They are real attributes that are not identical, even though they cannot be separated. And I explained this 10 times, literally in the 10 minutes, that Nick tried to divert away from the discussion about the LPT, because he already got buried and showed definitively that he doesn't know the distinction between counting by identity and counting by division, and he could not defend his pagan tritheistic God. I also demonstrated here today that I clearly understood the difference between formal, real distinction. I showed you from manuals. I showed you from videos of me talking about this a long time ago, even before Nick was even live on his YouTube. So give me a break, dude. You guys got to do better than this. But you, in lying about me and in misrepresenting me and in at least having the discussion with me and allowing me to bake you, it allowed me one good thing, which I actually appreciate. You allowed me to use this material to educate my audience. So inshallah, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this video to educate the Muslims and Christians out there and those with a sincere heart. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us all. And now, before I close out, I'm going to go to your super chat questions. Actually, before I do that, remember, I'm skipping over something, guys. I've been going for 3 hours, so I forgot. I wanted to show you guys this earlier. Remember when Palamas says here, there are, however, energies of God which have a beginning and end, as all the saints will confirm. He says, our opponent thinks that everything which has a beginning is created. Now, who says that everything which has a beginning is created? Let me show you this. You know who says this? Thomas Aquinas says this, actually. Thomas Aquinas literally says verbatim this. Okay, so this is in, let me just show you guys this. This is on New Advent, a Catholic website. This is from the Summa, third part, question 2, Article 7, is the union itself something created? He's talking about the union between the divine person of the Son and his divine essence and the human nature, right? So he's answering a question, and he says, on the contrary, these are Aquinas's words, whatever has a beginning in time is created. You see that, guys? Let me zoom in on that for you. Okay. Article 7, whether the union of the divine nature and the human is anything created. On the contrary, whatever has a beginning in time is created. Now, this union was not from eternity, but it began in time. Therefore, the union is something created. There you go. There you go. So Aquinas is explicitly being refuted or attempting to be refuted by Palamas. He says that whatever has a beginning in time is created. Palamas denies that. Okay? Explicitly. Direct contradiction there. Okay, now, the other thing I wanted to show you guys, that so you saw that Palamas kept quoting Basil the Great, referring to St. Basil. And one of the texts that I think, and to be fair, I agree that Palamas is representing Basil accurately. I think the Catholics try to cope on this, and they can't actually deal with this. But this is letter 234, which I think is really clear from Basil. He says, to the same, in answer to another question, do you worship what you know or what you do not know? If I answer, I worship what I know, they immediately reply, what is the essence of the object of worship? Then if I confess that I am ignorant of the essence, they turn on me again and say, so you worship you know not what? I answer that the word to know has many meanings. We say that we know the greatness of God, his power, his wisdom, his goodness, his providence over us, and the justness of his judgment, but not his very essence. The question is, therefore, only put for the sake of dispute. For he who denies that he knows the essence does not confess him to be ignorant of God, because our idea of God is gathered from all the attributes which I have enumerated, meaning there are more than one. But God, he says, is simple, and whatever attribute of him you have reckoned as knowable is of his essence. But the absurdities involved in this sophism are innumerable. So he's attacking divine simplicity, or the idea that God either doesn't have any attributes or that all of his attributes are identical to each other and identical to the essence. He's attacking this. When all these high attributes have been enumerated, are they all names of one essence, like the Martezela say? And is there the same mutual force in his awfulness and his loving kindness? Is his justice and his creative power, his providence and his foreknowledge, and his bestowal of rewards and punishments, his majesty and his providence? In mentioning any of these, do we declare his essence? If they say yes, let them not ask if we know the essence of God, but let them inquire of us whether we know God to be awful or just or merciful. These we confess that we know. If they say that essence is something distinct, let them not put us in the wrong on the score of simplicity. For they confess themselves that there is a distinction between the essence and each one of the attributes enumerated. The operations are various and the essence is simple. But we say, meaning Basil says, that we know our God from his operations, but do not undertake to approach near to his essence. His operations come down to us, but his essence remains beyond our reach. Meaning that there is a real distinction between the attributes of God and his I hope it's still working now. I want to see when that actually disconnected. Okay, so I froze there for a second, guys. If they say that essence is something distinct, let them not put us in the wrong on the score of simplicity. For they confess themselves that there is a distinction between the essence and each one of the attributes enumerated. The operations are various and the essence is simple. But we say, meaning Basil says, that we know our God from his operations, but do not undertake to approach near to his essence. His operations come down to us, but its essence remains beyond our reach, meaning that there is a real distinction between the attributes of God and his. Okay, I see where it cut off. I got to read the whole quote, essentially, that there is a real distinction between God's essence and his attributes. Sorry to break that to you, Christian Wagner, other Thomists. That is the honest reality. But before I get to the super chats, if you guys have any super chats, have any burning questions or comments that you want to make before I close it out, send a super chat now so I can take a look at it, inshallah. But I want to play one last video, which I made a whole separate video on. But I want to see if Nick and Avery, I'm going to give them another chance to admit that, well, apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? Nick is very ignorant. And I believe Nick was actually feeding GodLogic this information during my debate or discussion with GodLogic. And you're going to see that GodLogic actually used a fake quote. He fabricated a quote from Justin Martyr. And I want to admit that he either made a mistake or he lied. Because if he won't admit this, then he cannot be trusted. And he should be deemed a complete ignoramus. Okay?
So what you talking about, bro? Justin Martyr's killing you. Let's read Justin Martyr again. He says the word is sent not as an inanimate power, but as a person begotten of the Father's substance. He appears in a vision sometimes.
So you hear him reading. He said, Justin Martyr says, and he thinks Justin Martyr's burying me, right?
So what you talking about, bro? Justin Martyr's killing you. Let's read Justin Martyr again.
Justin Martyr's killing me. Let's read Justin Martyr again. Now listen to what he reads.
He says the word is sent not as an inanimate power, but as a person begotten of the Father's substance.
Now, let's see where he read that from. Okay? Let me show you guys where he read that from. This is New Advent. This is Dialogue with Trypho, chapter 128. He said, Justin Martyr says, and buries you. The word is not sent as an inanimate power, but as a person begotten of the Father's substance. You know the problem with that, guys? Guess what? That's not part of Justin Martyr's text. Those are not Justin Martyr's words. That is the website who put a chapter heading. Those chapter headings are not Justin Martyr's words. Nick and GodLogic would know this if they actually had the text of Dialogue with Trypho, where I showed this last time. And if you go to chapter 128, let me show you guys this really quick. You'll see that on the screen here, 128, look, there's nothing there. The word is not sent as an inanimate power, but as a person begotten of the Father's substance. That's nowhere there. Now, it's not only that, to see at the top, if you want, Dialogue with Trypho. Okay. This is page 346 on there, Justin Martyr. Now, I'll show you the previous page so you can see the previous chapter. Where is it here? There it is, chapter 127. No chapter heading, guys. Why? Because those are not words of Justin Martyr. So you, Avery, just use this as a theological point that you thought you were making that Justin Martyr was burying me on, but you were actually reading a chapter heading. So why don't you come out and either admit that you lied and that you knew what you were doing, like a bad little puppy dog, or admit like a good little puppy dog that you were fed this information by somebody else. You've never read Justin Martyr. You were confused, and you read this by somebody from a Discord channel or somebody giving you this live while you were debating me to respond to my objections. And you were fed this information wrongly, and you took it for granted, read it, and claimed it was from Justin Martyr, but it wasn't. Either way, you're either a liar or an ignoramus, and you should be avoided and ignored even by Christians. Come out and have the bollocks to admit it. Will you? I don't think so. And other Christians should be condemning Avery for using fake quotes. William Albrick condemned that other guy, what was it, needforgod.net or something like that, for using fake quotes, and rightly so. Now, all my criticisms, you can use them, but I don't use fake quotes. These guys are using fake quotes because they know that their own setup did not actually use or affirm the Trinity. They didn't. It shows that Jesus himself, which I'm writing a book on, Jesus himself, and if you want to support that, I've posted several times the link to support that, because I'm spending a lot of time, money, and effort in buying all of these books to actually read them and do research for the project. So if you want to support that, make sure you go to my channel where I've been putting the GoFundMe link to support the work that I'm doing on this book that I'm writing, where I'm exposing the fact that the Christianity setup and their early church fathers and ulama and scholars did not actually believe in the Trinity, which proves definitively that the Bible nor Jesus Christ himself, peace be upon him, actually taught it either. Because if they did, we would find that their scholars, or at least even lay people, were explaining the Trinity this way, but they weren't. Okay, so let me stop that. And let me just now go through the super chats. Okay. So 4-ounce King says, the Son walked on earth with the divine essence while the Father was somewhere else with the divine essence. How is that not division of the essence itself as well? Good question. I don't think they have good answers for this. They just go into philosophical coping. Brother says, counting by division doesn't account distinctions. I mean, counting by division is a type of distinction, but it's not the only type. And that's the point that I was making earlier. Ali says, Jake, I'm confused how this guy wasn't understanding you. Blows my mind. They have supporters, bro. Also, Akhi, when Libiano debated Dog Logic that first time on Jesus, what was your opinion on the debate? Honestly, I don't recall it. It's not really sharp in my mind, so I can't comment much on that debate. But yeah, these guys are very confused. Nick has no idea what he's talking about. See what Ryan says. Nick doesn't even know Leibniz's law, clown. 100% right about that. Does he think ontology, I think he means being? In a sense, it does. If you're talking about it's a thing, a being. It's a thing in that sense. But it's not we don't believe it's a being like a person or a person with attributes. God has attributes, right? But God doesn't have multiple persons with multiple attributes. And we don't believe that the attributes are called God. We believe they're attributes of God, whereas they believe the persons are God and are distinct from each other. And so if you count them by identity, you get 3 gods. If you count the attributes by identity, you get multiple attributes, not multiple gods, because they're attributes, not gods. Okay. Jake, why can't you count by identity without ending up with 3? Why can't you count by identity without ending up with 3? I don't know what you're referring to, 3 gods or 3 persons, but in any case, whatever category you're counting by identity, if they're discernible, if they're not identical, then 1 by the amount of subjects that, like Branson said, are logically discernible from each other and yet bear the predicate. So if Father and Son are each called God and have distinctions amongst them, then they count as 3 gods. That's just how, or 2 gods plus the Holy Spirit. That's just how counting works. Miro sent a $2.99 super sticker. Appreciate that. Striving Muslim says, Salam wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. See here, it is clear point you're making, but the video itself I had to watch a few times to get how he was dodging. My advice is take your time dumbing it for the audience so the Christians can't run. It's not, I think I've been talking about this literally for years, guys. If people don't get it, it's really on them. There's not much I could do, like spending hours upon hours explaining these things. They rely on the issue being complex during your live discussions to pretend to their audience they know it and run away. May Allah make it easy. I mean, yeah, but I just think they're only going to convince people who are already convinced by their pagan foolishness. Ahad says, may Allah bless you, Akhi, Ameen. Fikum barakallah. All right, guys, if you want to support my work, the GoFundMe link has been going across the screen this entire time. The best links to support me are PayPal, Patreon, YouTube membership, and the GoFundMe if you want to support the work that I'm doing and the research that I'm doing for upcoming projects and videos, then I really would appreciate that, guys. It's much needed and appreciated, and really can't continue to do the work here at the rate that I am without your support. So if you're benefiting, please consider that. At the very least, consider hitting the like button, leaving a comment, let me know your thoughts. Subscribe to the new channel if you haven't already. Some people don't even know that I have the new channel, JBrancatella 2.0. So let friends and family and people who are interested know. Share this on your social media platforms, no matter how big or how small your reach is. It really does help with the algorithm, guys. And above and beyond, thank you all. Barakallahu feek once again. May Allah bless you all and reward you all for your efforts and your support in any way that it is. I hope that this was beneficial. I hope that people learned from this, and that Nick, being a bozo, actually helped us to get information, good information out there. But anyway, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.